The world has people known as repairers who have the unique ability to fix up weapons, armor, and all kinds of gear. They don't just patch things up, they can basically reverse any damage or warping an item has taken. Lyle is one of these guys, but he sees his job a bit differently. He believes that when he's fixing an item, he's actually repairing the memories that the owner has attached to it. After finishing up a job on a sword, Lyle's pretty satisfied with how it turned out. This is the start of his journey as a specialized craftsman. Things take a turn for the worse back at the guild. Lyle's party leader is absolutely losing it, kicking over furniture and calling Lyle's work total junk that isn't helping anyone. The leader doesn't stop there. He gets right in Lyle's face and tells him the only reason he's even in the party is because the leader felt sorry for him, especially since Lyle's only skill is fixing stuff. The guy keeps ranting, complaining that Lyle had the nerve to give him a beat-up shield for a high-level S-rank mission. Lyle tries to stand up for himself, pointing out that the shield actually did its job and blocked a wyvern's attack earlier. The leader isn't having it though, claiming their recent success on an A-rank mission was purely because of his own skills, not the gear. The leader continues to scream, telling Lyle he's just dead weight who can't fight. He dismisses Lyle's profession entirely, saying that anyone can do simple repairs and chores. Lyle looks pretty crushed by the insult. He can't believe the leader is downplaying his hard work by just calling it chores. Even though he's treated like this, Lyle has been pushing through it to save up enough money to open his own repair shop one day. He knows he's not a frontline fighter, so he's been doing his best to contribute by keeping everyone's equipment in top shape, but things are clearly reaching a breaking point. The leader finally snaps and screams at Lyle, telling him a useless handyman has no place in the party and that he's officially fired as of today. Lyle just stands there, taking the verbal abuse with a crushed look on his face. Lyle doesn't fight it and quietly says he understands. The leader doesn't show a bit of sympathy and tells him to get out of his sight immediately since he knows where he stands now. As he turns to leave, Lyle shows his character by looking back one last time and thanking the leader for everything up until now. Lyle walks out the door and leaves the party behind for good. The leader just sits at the table, grumbling to himself and acting like he's glad to be rid of the dead weight. Just as Lyle leaves, a new voice speaks up, commenting on how amazing something is. The leader is caught off guard and asks what the person is talking about. A tall woman with long hair appears, holding the shield Lyle worked on. She mentions she heard a rumor that this specific shield was strong enough to stop a wyvern's attack. She holds up the worn, scratched shield and asks if it belongs to their party. The leader dismisses it instantly, saying it's just a piece of junk that Lyle, the guy he just kicked out, repaired. He tells her they have no use for it anymore. The woman gets a bit of a smirk on her face and says if they don't want it, she'll happily take it off their hands. The leader thinks she's a total weirdo for wanting it and calls her an eccentric. He continues to mutter about how he can't believe anyone would want to pick up a piece of trash like that. Lindo watches Lyle walk away, feeling like she's seen his face somewhere before. She can't quite place it, so she just shrugs it off for now. Later, Lyle is sitting alone on a park bench, looking pretty down. He's stressed because he's short on cash and feels like his dream is slipping away just when he was getting close. As he's moping, Lindo walks up to him. She calls out to him, specifically addressing him as a repairer. Lyle looks up and Lindo gets straight to the point. She asks him if he'd be willing to take a personal request from her. Lyle is totally caught off guard. He looks at her and can tell just by her gear that she's a serious adventurer, which makes him even more confused. He finally finds his voice and asks her how she even knew he was a repairer to begin with. Ignoring the question, she pulls out a sword and tells him she wants him to fix it. She even says she'll pay whatever price he asks. Lyle is completely stunned by the offer and can barely process what's happening. The scene moves to Lyle's workshop, where they're sitting across from each other at a table. Lyle looks at the sword she brought and asks if it's an item that holds special memories for her. Lindo gets a bit of a distant look in her eyes and admits that's basically the case. Lyle sits in silence for a moment, letting Lindo's words about the sword's history sink in. As he carefully unwraps the blade on his workbench, Lyle points out that even though the sword has been used a ton, it's obvious someone took really good care of it over the years. He looks closer at the hilt and notices a family crest engraved there, though he mentions it's starting to fade away from age. Lyle manages Lindo's expectations, explaining that because the sword is so old, he might not be able to get it back to its original condition perfectly. He tells her that if she's still okay with him handling it, he'll do the absolute best he can, then asks her if that's a deal. Lindo looks relieved and says she's happy with that, telling Lyle she's officially counting on him to pull it off. Lyle gives a firm nod and says he'll do it as he grips the sword, feeling the weight of the task. He formally accepts the request, marking the start of his first real high-level job. The scene shifts to a memory from when Lyle was a kid. Someone is calling his name, warning him that his dad will lose it if he keeps hanging around the workshop for too long. Young Lyle ignores the warning and rushes over to his grandfather, who is busy working on something at his desk by the window. Young Lyle looks at a beautifully decorated plate, clearly impressed by how it looks. He tells his grandfather the decorations are really pretty and asks if he was the one who created it from scratch. His grandfather corrects him, saying it's not about making something new but about the art of repairing. Lyle looks a bit confused and just repeats the word back to him. The grandfather explains that he's basically just fixing things, regardless of their color or shape. We see several items like a crown, a lantern, and a sword that have been brought back to life. He picks up a small pendant, looking at it with a lot of care and focus. He tells Lyle that what he's really fixing is everything that was poured into the object. He's talking about the memories that people associate with their belongings. Lyle just stares at him for a second, taking in what his grandfather just said. Feeling inspired, Lyle looks up at his grandfather with a lot of energy and says he wants to try doing repairs himself. The grandfather starts teaching him the trade right then and there, guiding Lyle's hand as he learns how to work at the craftsman's table. Back in the present, Lyle stands at his own workbench. He's got Lindo's sword laid out in front of him, ready to start the high-level job he just accepted. He puts on a face mask and dives into the work. Sparks fly everywhere as he hammers away, completely focused on bringing the old blade back to its former glory. Lyle puts the finishing touches on the job, his hand hovering over the glowing magical patterns as the repair comes to an end. The sword looks brand new, especially the intricate detail on the hilt. Lyle wipes the sweat off his forehead and lets out a sigh of relief, happy with how the work turned out. A few days pass, and Lyle meets up with Lindo to hand over the finished product. He's visibly shaking and looks incredibly nervous as he tries to get her attention. Lindo looks over at him calmly and asks what's on his mind. He's holding a heavy bag stuffed to the brim with gold coins. He looks completely stunned by the amount and asks if it's really all right for him to accept that much money for the job. Lindo just smiles and tells him she doesn't mind at all. She explains that the quality of his work actually went way beyond what she was expecting. Lyle is happy he could help her out, but he's still curious about something. He asks her why she decided to come to him with the repair request in the first place. She tells him that she actually saw him at the tavern on the day he was having that big argument with his old team. Lyle remembers the moment vividly. His old party leader was screaming in his face, calling him a useless errand boy and telling him he was officially kicked out of the group. Lindo continues, mentioning that she had specifically noticed the shield he had repaired back then. Lindo recalls the shield she saw back at the tavern. Even though it was clearly an old piece of gear that had seen plenty of action, she noticed there wasn't a single fresh scratch or major dent on it. She explains that the quality was insane because the shield actually got tougher with every repair, making it perfect for blocking monster attacks. She tells Lyle that a regular repairman doesn't have that kind of skill. Lindo looks at him with genuine respect and says she can tell he's put in a massive amount of effort to get this good at his craft. Lyle takes it in but stays humble, looking out the window of his workshop. He tells her he still feels like a total amateur and doesn't think he has the same drive or experience as the person he looks up to. He looks around at his gear and mentions that this shop is actually a place full of memories of his grandfather, who was also a repairer. He admits that right now, his skills only really work when he's in this specific workshop. Lyle knows he has a long way to go before he's a real pro, so he tells Lindo that his first big goal is to open up his own shop and keep training. The conversation shifts to the sword lying on the bed. Lindo gets serious and tells him the truth. The sword he just fixed was actually a gift left to her by her late father. Lyle is completely stunned by the news and is at a loss for words. He looks closer at the blade and realizes it's a memento of Lindo's family, noting the faint family crest that's carved into the metal. Lindo looks down calmly and confirms that's exactly what the sword represents to her. Lindo explains that she's put this sword through a lot ever since she started out as a rookie adventurer. Because she used it so heavily, the weapon had eventually started falling apart and reached its limit. She admits she had actually given up on it, thinking the sword was completely useless and couldn't be used anymore. But then, she tells Lyle that he was the one who managed to fix it and bring it back to life. Lindo looks at him and says that the memories and feelings she inherited from her father were essentially restored by his repair work. Lyle is pretty much floored by this and can't even find the words to respond. As he thinks back, we see a memory of young Lyle working with his grandfather. It hits him that objects aren't just tools, they actually hold onto the memories of the people who use them. Sitting there in the workshop, Lyle realizes he's finally made a real decision about his future. He tells himself that one day he's going to become a master repairer, just like his grandfather was. With a determined look on his face, he decides that he wants to be the kind of repairer who can fix the memories tied to people's gear, not just the metal itself. Lyle looks over at Lindo and gives her a heartfelt thank you for everything she said. Lindo just smiles and says she's the one who should be thanking him for the amazing work. After a moment, she pivots the conversation to ask him something else. As they sit together at the table, Lindo asks him straight up if he thinks he can actually make that dream of his a reality. Lyle looks over his shoulder as Lindo walks away. He clenches his fist by his side and quietly says yes, taking her question to heart. Suddenly, he gets a huge burst of energy and shouts out a loud yes. He's got a massive smile on his face, as he promises himself that he's definitely going to make his dream of being a master repairer come true. Lindo smiles to herself as she leaves, thinking about how Lyle is going to be incredibly busy from here on out now that he's found his resolve. Lyle just stands there looking completely lost with question marks practically floating around his head. He doesn't really get what she meant, so he just gives a small, awkward laugh and goes along with it. A few days go by, and the scene shifts to the lower floors of a high-difficulty dungeon where things are getting serious. Everything goes south when a dragon suddenly appears. The adventurers are caught off guard because they're only at the entrance of the lower floor and didn't expect to run into something that dangerous so soon. The dragon looms over them, looking massive and intimidating. One of the women in the party realizes they're in over their heads and tells the group that their current gear isn't strong enough to take this thing down. The leader sees how bad the situation is and orders a full retreat. As the party starts to scramble, someone reaches for their blade to cover the escape. Lindo doesn't run though. She charges forward with a look of pure determination, even as her teammates shout at her that she's being completely reckless. She stands alone against the giant dragon. Her teammate watches in fear, shouting that there's no way she can pull this off with a sword that's supposedly worn out and broken. Lindo takes the dragon head-on, delivering a massive slash that cuts right through the beast. Her teammates can't believe what they're seeing. The male adventurer is completely shocked, saying there's no way this is actually happening. Lindo just smiles as she looks at her blade. She knows the only reason she could pull that off is because of Lyle's work, and she thinks to herself that he really is on another level. Later on, Lindo visits Lyle's new shop. Lyle is busy behind the counter and gives a standard welcome to repair the memories, but he lights up the second he realizes it's her. Lindo takes a seat and tells him he's got a great shop. She mentions she actually had to wait for a while to come in because the flow of customers was constant. Lyle is just happy to see her and says the success is all thanks to her. Lyle shows her around a bit, explaining that the shop is connected directly to the atelier, making it easy to use as both a workshop and a store. Lindo agrees that it's a pretty smart setup. Lindo gives a satisfied smile and comments on how thriving the business looks. She says it looks like her advertising really worked out. Lyle stops what he's doing and looks totally confused. He asks her what she's talking about when she mentions advertising. Lindo casually drops a bombshell, telling him she's actually the leader of an SSS rank party. She explains that she's been telling all her high-level adventurer friends that they need to go see this amazing repairer. Lyle completely loses it. He starts panicking and tells her to hold on, finally realizing why he's been drowning in work since the day he opened. He knew she was a big deal, but he had no idea she was that famous. Lyle looks pretty overwhelmed. He tells Lindo that while he's really happy she's supporting his shop, he's starting to get a bit worried about the scale of it all. He starts overthinking things, feeling like if people expect too much from him, he's eventually going to end up in over his head. Just as he's worrying, the door flies open. A regular customer walks in and loudly asks if the Mr. Repairer can help him out again today. Lyle jumps into work mode and tells the guy he's on it. He turns back to Lindo and asks if she minds waiting just a little bit while he takes care of the customer. Lindo doesn't mind at all. She gives him a big smile and tells him it's no problem. As she watches him work, she's actually pretty impressed. She mentions how crazy it is that he's already got repeat customers after being open for such a short time. She looks satisfied and says that since the shop is doing so well, they can probably trust him with their request without having to worry. Suddenly, a cold voice from behind asks how much longer she plans on making them wait. Lindo's expression shifts immediately and she starts apologizing. It turns out Lindo isn't alone. She's with a girl named Asha who looks pretty annoyed as she stares Lindo down. Meanwhile, Lyle is still busy at the counter. He finishes up with his current customer and sees them out, thanking them for coming and telling them to have a good one. Lyle finally catches his breath after the rush of customers and wipes the sweat from his forehead. He realizes he left Lindo waiting and starts to look around for her. Just then, the shop bell rings again. Lyle looks up to give a standard welcome, but he's surprised to see Lindo standing there with the young girl, Asha, from earlier. Lyle feels a bit awkward and leads them over to the sitting area to chat. They all sit down in the lounge and Lyle asks for clarification. He asks if it's correct that the customer today isn't actually Lindo, but the young girl she brought with her. The girl immediately takes offense at his casual tone. She looks down on him for being a commoner and can't believe he'd refer to her so informally. She tells him her name is Asha. Asha isn't just annoyed. She looks dead serious as she tells Lindo to take Lyle's head right then and there for being disrespectful. Lyle completely loses it and starts shaking, terrified by the fact that she's calling him a commoner and wanting him dead. Lindo tries to play it off with a nervous laugh and asks Asha to just take it easy. Lindo starts the introductions properly to smooth things over. She looks at Asha and tells her that this is Lyle. She explains that Lyle is the owner of the shop and is actually the highly skilled master repairer she personally recommends. Asha looks at Lyle with a huge amount of doubt. She seems shocked that a guy who looks like him could actually be the master Lindo was talking about. Lyle tries to keep things professional and introduces himself as Lyle Desquile, telling Asha it's a pleasure to meet her. Asha isn't interested in being friendly and makes it clear she'd never set foot in a place like this if Lindo hadn't been the one to recommend it. Lyle looks at the item they brought in and asks if it's a child's dress, immediately apologizing if the question sounds rude. Looking closer at the garment, Lyle sees just how rough of a shape it's in. The thing is incredibly old, the fabric is falling apart, and it's completely lost its original form. He asks for more details on what he's looking at. Asha gets defensive immediately and asks if he's blind, stating pretty bluntly that it's obviously a dress. Lyle starts sweating and tries to walk back his comment, laughing nervously while explaining he didn't mean to be insulting. Asha stares him down and demands to know what he actually meant, telling him to hurry up and get to the point because she doesn't have all day. Lyle struggles to find the right words, thinking to himself that this girl is way too much to handle. Lindo steps in to clear the air and explains that the dress is actually a family heirloom. It's the same one Asha's mother used to wear when she was a little girl. The realization hits Lyle, and he asks if the dress really belongs to Asha's mother, finally understanding why it's so important despite the damage. Lyle takes a closer look at the dress, noting it belonged to Asha's mother back when she was a little girl. Even though the fabric is falling apart, he can tell it was originally made by a master craftsman because the level of detail is incredible. He can't help but wonder how such a high-quality piece ended up in this state. Lindo starts to chime in to explain the history behind the dress, but Asha isn't having it. She turns her back on them and starts heading for the door, leaving Lyle looking pretty confused by the sudden exit. Asha shuts the conversation down immediately, telling Lindo to stop right there and not say another word about it. Lindo looks a bit surprised by the outburst while Lyle just sits there, feeling the awkwardness of the situation. Looking back at Lyle one last time, Asha makes her demands clear. She tells him she's only there for one thing. She wants that dress fixed, and she wants it done as fast as possible. Without waiting for a reply, Asha heads straight for the exit. She gives a cold, formal goodbye before throwing one last sharp look over her shoulder as she walks out the door. With Asha gone, Lindo decides it's time for her to go as well. She tells Lyle she'll be heading out for the day and says her goodbyes. Lyle watches them go, whispering Asha's name to himself. He can't shake the feeling that she was in a desperate hurry, and he starts wondering if there's a specific reason why she's so pressed for time. Just as Lindo is about to leave, Lyle suddenly jumps up from his seat. He calls out to her, clearly not ready to let the conversation end just yet. The two of them sit back down to talk. Lyle starts by apologizing for stopping her so abruptly, but Lindo waves it off. She actually apologizes to him instead, admitting she shouldn't have tried to leave without explaining the situation. Lyle gets straight to the point and tells Lindo he really needs to know the reason behind Asha's sense of urgency. Lindo goes quiet for a moment, looking like she's weighing how much she should say. Lyle starts off by admitting he might be overstepping his bounds. He explains that as a repairer, his job isn't just about fixing the physical object someone brings to him. He thinks back to his grandfather, who taught him that the real work is about the feelings and intentions woven into an item. It's about making sure those sentiments are carried forward through the repair. Moving on, Lyle tells Lindo that's exactly why he wants to understand the history of the dress. He needs to know what kind of item it really is to do the job right. Lindo takes a breath and starts to open up. She explains that she and Asha first met a few years back while she was working on a guard mission for the family. She mentions Asha's mother, Lady Miranda, and says they've been close ever since that mission. Lindo reveals that Miranda is the actual owner of the dress, but then her tone shifts. Lyle is visibly shaken as he repeats the words incurable disease. Lindo confirms the grim reality, and a heavy silence falls over the room as the weight of the situation sinks in. Lindo goes on to explain that Miranda has been battling this unknown illness for years, and every doctor they've seen has basically given up hope. She says the condition is getting worse every day, leaving Miranda bedridden and in constant pain. Lyle is completely stunned by the news. He can barely process how dire the situation actually is for Asha and her mother. Lindo looks down, noting that the whole situation with her mother is the reason Asha was acting so aggressive and on edge earlier. In the next scene, Lindo apologizes for Asha's rude behavior. She tells Lyle she feels bad about how Asha spoke to him and wants to make things right on her behalf. Lyle is caught off guard when Lindo suddenly bows her head to him in a deep apology. He quickly tells her to please look up, saying it's totally fine and that anyone would have acted that way given the heavy situation with her mother. As the tension settles, Lyle looks over at the dress they've been talking about. He asks her if that specific dress is the one tied to all these memories. Lindo confirms it, explaining that the dress is Miranda's most precious possession. It was a gift from someone very important to her, and it's filled with history that can't be replaced. Lyle stays quiet, realizing just how much weight this job carries. Lindo goes on to say that Miranda used to wear that dress almost every single day when she was a kid. She loved it so much that even when it got completely worn out and tattered, she would take it to a famous master repairer to get it fixed up time and time again. Looking Lyle straight in the eye, Lindo asks him if he'll please lend them his skills for this. She's not just asking as an adventurer, but as someone who cares deeply about the family. Lyle can tell that this isn't just a job for Lindo, it's something she personally wants to see happen for Miranda. He nods and tells her he's in. Determined to help, Lyle formally asks her to let him handle the repair. Lindo looks relieved and tells him she's really counting on him to pull this off. Lindo gives him a small, genuine smile as she thanks him. She says she's leaving everything in his hands, showing how much she trusts his ability despite what others might think of him. Lyle starts to think about the task ahead and admits he has one concern. Internally, he realizes this is exactly the kind of situation his grandfather used to talk about, where the repair is about much more than just the fabric. He focuses on the idea of repairing memories. He knows that this job is on a completely different level than any normal gear fix, and he'll have to approach it with a different mindset. Lyle takes a look at the task and realizes the dress is so old and worn out that he can't even tell what the original design was. He tells Lindo that he's going to have to ask the owner, Miranda, about what it's supposed to look like. But then Lyle remembers the situation and looks a bit worried, noting that Miranda isn't really in a state where she can talk to him right now. Lindo looks pretty solemn as she agrees that's the reality of the situation. Lyle brings up something Lindo mentioned earlier about a famous master repairer who used to work on the dress. Lindo confirms it, saying Miranda did mention someone like that in the past. A realization hits Lyle, and he starts thinking that a clue might be a lot closer than he expected. He wonders if that master repairer could actually be someone he knows. Feeling a surge of hope, Lyle slams his hands on the table and thanks Lindo. He tells her he thinks he finally has a solid lead to follow. A few days later, Lyle is walking through the city streets looking at a map. He's confident he can recreate the dress itself, but he's still stressed because he's missing one really important part. He thinks back to how he got the address for his destination from Lindo. He starts getting nervous, thinking that Asha is going to be completely livid with him for showing up like this. Lyle keeps walking through the cobblestone streets, checking his surroundings and figuring he has to be getting close to the place on the map. Suddenly, a massive fancy mansion appears in front of him. Lyle is totally shocked and realizes this isn't the kind of house a normal person would ever live in. Lyle is completely overwhelmed standing at the gate of the massive mansion. He awkwardly apologizes to the stern butler guarding the entrance, thinking to himself that Lindo definitely left out the part where Asha was some kind of high society elite. The butler isn't making it easy on him, giving Lyle a look that could kill while demanding to know exactly what he wants. Trying to keep his cool, Lyle stammers through an explanation about being hired to fix a dress for Asha. He finally manages to introduce himself as Lyle Desquile, hoping the name means something to the guy. From a window high above, Asha looks down and notices the commotion at the front gate. She recognizes the guy immediately and wonders if it really could be him showing up at her house. Lyle is still down at the gate, desperately trying to convince the butler that he's not a suspicious person and just needs to ask Asha a few questions. Just as he's struggling to explain himself, Asha's voice rings out calling him over. Lyle is relieved to see her, but Asha looks totally shocked. She demands to know why he's even at her place in the first place. Asha grills him for showing up at a woman's private residence so suddenly, but then it clicks for her. She realizes Lindo is probably the one behind this whole mess. Lyle keeps apologizing for the surprise visit, but insists there's something he absolutely has to ask her. Asha calms down a bit and asks him what exactly it is he needs to hear. The butler is still standing guard, but Asha tells him to back off and go back inside since she's got it handled. With the butler out of the way, Lyle reaches out and shows her something he's been carrying. Asha looks at the item, clearly confused about why he brought it. Lyle shows Asha a sketch of the dress, explaining that he managed to piece together what it used to look like by digging through old repair records. Asha looks surprised as Lyle points out something specific he noticed. He tells her that based on the fabric, there are clear marks on the chest area where some kind of jewelry or accessory used to be attached. He explains that his goal is to get the dress back to its original state before returning it to her mother. Because of that, he figured Asha was the best person to ask about those missing parts. Moving on, Lyle admits that he's already been to every jewelry shop in the city trying to find a replacement. Despite looking everywhere, he tells her he couldn't find a single piece that felt like it belonged on the dress. Lyle tells her he thought asking her directly would be the most accurate way to solve the mystery. Asha is completely floored by his dedication, asking him if he even realizes how many shops he must have walked into to cover the whole city. Lyle bows respectfully and asks her to let him know if she happens to remember anything about the jewelry. He tells her he isn't giving up yet and plans to keep searching for a while longer. As Lyle walks away, Asha stands there in silence. She grips her papers tight and looks down, clearly affected by how much effort he's putting into this. Her expression softens as she starts to drift back into a memory of her childhood, recalling a time she spoke to her mother. In the flashback, a much younger Asha is holding up the same dress, though it looks pretty worn out even back then. She asks her mother why she bothers keeping such a raggedy old thing instead of just throwing it away. Her mother looks back and tells her that the dress is a very important memory. Young Asha looks at the tattered fabric, confused about how something so beat up could be considered precious. Her mother just says that it might be a little too early for her to understand the value of things like that. In the flashback, young Asha points out to her mother that the brooch on her dress is about to fall off. Miranda takes a look and realizes the clasp has definitely loosened up over time. Miranda says it's not surprising since the dress is so old and worn out. She decides it's better to just take the piece off for now before it falls off on its own. Asha looks a bit confused as her mother removes the jewelry. Miranda then reaches out and gently takes both of her daughter's hands in her own. She tells the little girl that if they left the brooch there, she'd probably end up losing it, and she doesn't want that to happen. Looking at her daughter with a lot of affection, Miranda tells Asha that she knows she's going to grow up to be an amazing woman. She goes on to say that she wants Asha to see the world, have all kinds of experiences, and eventually meet someone special. Miranda admits she wishes she could be there to see all of that happen forever. The memory fades as we see the brooch held carefully in someone's hands. Back in the present, Lyle is losing it at his workshop. He's surrounded by books and records, frustrated because he still hasn't found any trace of the jewelry. He's got the rest of the dress looking perfect, but this one missing piece is holding him back. Lyle realizes he's basically out of time at this point. He figures his only option is to spend another entire night searching, but just as he's getting ready to dive back in, he hears someone at the door. Asha walks right into the workshop, apologizing for the late visit. Lyle is completely shocked to see her there and asks what she's doing at his place so late. Asha bows deeply to Lyle, apologizing for showing up so late at night. She admits she knows it's a pretty rude move to drop by like this, especially since she's the one who gave him the job in the first place. She looks at him, clearly confused about why he's working himself to the bone. She asks why he's willing to go this far and put in so much effort for a dress that doesn't even belong to him. Asha explains that the real reason she came by was to see his determination for herself. She wanted to know if he was actually serious about the repair. Looking down and gripping her hands, she's honest with him and says she still doesn't fully trust him yet. She's thinking back to the memories of her mother, but even with her doubts, she can't just walk away. She says that if there's even a tiny chance she can do something for her mother, she has to take it. Lyle stands there listening, seeing how much this means to her. Lyle turns away for a second, telling her he's not expecting her to just suddenly start believing in him right now. He gets that trust takes time. He explains that he's a repairer, so his whole job is to do everything humanly possible to fix things. He starts to tell her what his real goal is with this project. Lyle says he wants to make sure her feelings reach her mother, right along with all of Miranda's old memories. Asha looks completely taken aback by how much he actually cares about the sentimental side of the job. Just as the moment gets serious, Lyle's lack of sleep finally catches up to him. He suddenly loses his balance and starts to go down, making Asha shout his name in a panic. Lyle manages to catch himself and laughs it off, looking pretty embarrassed. He apologizes to Asha, telling her he just got a little lightheaded and stumbled. Lyle's desk is a mess, covered in sketches, diagrams, and notes as he pours everything he has into the project. Asha looks at the scattered papers, seeing just how much work he's been putting in behind the scenes. While flipping through the stack, Lyle realizes a page is missing and mentions it out loud. Asha just watches him, seeing his genuine focus and realizing he isn't just doing this for the money. Asha suddenly breaks the silence, calling out to Lyle with a tone that makes him stop what he's doing. She looks him in the eye and asks him for a huge favor, making Lyle look up in total surprise. She reaches out, telling him that she wants to entrust him with something important. Asha takes his hands and places a beautiful decorative jewel in them. She asks him to please finish the dress of memories, finally showing that she fully believes in his skills and his heart. Lyle just says her name, looking completely stunned that she's finally decided to trust him with something so precious to her family. Just as they're having this moment, the door bursts open. Lindo rushes in, shouting for both of them and looking completely panicked. Asha turns around, wondering what's going on. Lindo is doubling over and gasping for air, but she manages to tell them they need to get moving and head back immediately. She drops the bombshell that something has happened to Miranda. Both Lyle and Asha freeze up, looking absolutely terrified by the news. Lindo keeps shouting for them to hurry, confirming that Miranda's situation is getting bad. The room feels heavy as the realization hits that they might be running out of time. Asha loses it when she hears the news, immediately calling out for her mother. She doesn't waste a second and bolts toward the room. Lyle tries to keep up, calling out her name as he watches her run off. Lyle reaches out and tells her to wait, but Asha is too caught up in the panic to slow down. Inside the mansion, the bedroom is packed with maids and staff. Asha's father is right there at the bedside, kneeling next to Miranda while everyone watches in silence. Miranda looks completely out of it in the bed. Her husband is a wreck, holding his hands together and telling her that it can't be over yet. He's clearly stressed out and starts wondering where Asha is, frustrated that she isn't there during such a bad moment. Just then the doors swing open and the whole group walks in. The father turns around and sees Asha standing there with Lyle and Lindo. He stops and stares, realizing that Asha is actually wearing the dress they've been working on. Asha ignores everything else and rushes to the bedside, kneeling down and calling out to her mother. Miranda starts to stir and lets out a weak sound. She slowly opens her eyes and looks up, asking if that's really Asha standing over her. Asha starts to pour her heart out while kneeling by the bed. The room is quiet as everyone watches the emotional moment between the daughter and her mother. With a warm smile, Asha tells her mother how happy she is. She says that being her daughter has made her truly happy. She starts thinking back to things her mother told her a long time ago. She mentions that she's finally starting to understand the things her mother said about her growing up. Asha admits she might not fully understand everything yet, but she's definitely feeling the weight of those words now. Holding her mother's hand tightly, Asha makes a promise. She says she wants to be just like her and grow up to be a wonderful woman. The light catches the brooch Lyle repaired, making it sparkle on the dress. Asha continues her promise as she holds onto her mother. Asha asks her mother to keep watching over her as she finds her own happiness in the future. Miranda, barely holding on, weakly calls out Asha's name. Miranda has tears streaming down her face, but she's smiling. She looks at Asha in the restored dress and tells her she looks absolutely beautiful. The story flashes back to the mansion years ago. A young Lyle is seen carrying a huge, wrapped gift, likely the fabric or the dress itself, while a young Asha looks on. In the memory, young Lyle takes Asha's hand and gives her a confident smile. It turns out these two have been connected since they were children. The memories of the past and the present moment blend together. Young Lyle, his grandfather and Miranda all share the same warm, peaceful smile, as if a long-standing weight has finally been lifted. Petals drift through the air as a final, quiet word of thanks is offered. A few days pass, and back at the shop, the door chime rings while Lyle is busy working. He looks up to find Asha standing there, looking much more composed than before. She greets him, saying it's been a while. Lyle is caught off guard and stays quiet for a second before calling out her name. Asha bows deeply to him. She apologizes for being so rude when they first met and expresses how grateful she is that he fixed her mother's dress. She says her thanks come straight from the heart. She pulls out a sealed envelope, prompting a question about what it is. Asha explains that the letter was one of her mother's most prized possessions. She tells Lyle that she felt like he was the person who was meant to have it. Lyle takes the letter and looks at it, letting out a soft breath as the gravity of the gift sinks in. Looking over the papers, Lyle says that this confirms what he had been thinking all along. The documents are revealed, and it turns out the contents of that letter hold the key to everything. The letter reveals a hidden connection. It turns out Miranda had written it to a specific repairer, and the contents point toward a very familiar name. The man Miranda relied on was Roan Disguise. Looking back at the memory of him, it's clear now that the legendary repairer she trusted was actually Lyle's own grandfather. Lyle reads through the pages and sees that Miranda was apologizing for missing his grandfather's funeral. The letter is packed with gratitude for all the work he did for her over the years. Everything starts making sense to Lyle. He remembers Lindo mentioning a famous repairer and realizes that his grandfather hadn't just worked on the dress once, he had been the one maintaining it for years. Lyle is struck by the realization that their families have been connected through this work for a long time. He starts to speak, realizing they share a deeper bond than he thought. Asha looks at him and explains that in the end, they just wanted to keep those precious memories alive. She gets honest with him and admits that she didn't actually trust him when they first met. Asha explains how terrified she was about handing over her mother's most important belongings to a total stranger. She really wasn't sure if she was making the right choice at the time. But now, looking at him with a warm smile, she says she thinks they were both feeling the same way about protecting what matters. Lyle gives her a bright, genuine smile and agrees with her. He acknowledges what she's saying but then prepares to bring up something else. Asha gets a bit blunt with Lyle and tells him to stop being so formal and distant when they talk. Lyle is completely caught off guard by her sudden change in tone. She goes on to say that she wants to keep their professional relationship going, so he should just call her Asha from now on. Lyle tries to find the right words to respond but just ends up stammering. Lyle eventually points out that he had no idea she was actually the daughter of a duke. It's a huge reveal for him, and he's clearly a bit overwhelmed by her status. Asha just gives him a bright, casual smile and says she simply forgot to mention it, acting like it's not that big of a deal. Lyle can only manage a nervous laugh and agrees with her, trying to play it cool despite the shock. Internally, Lyle is losing it. He knew she was from a high-ranking family, but a duke's house is on a whole different level. He realizes that explains why her mansion was so ridiculously massive. As he calms down, he thinks about how his repair shop is finally starting to see some real success, and it's all thanks to the support he's gotten from Lindo and Asha. Lindo steps in and suggests that since things are going so well for him, he should take on a request from her as well. She asks him directly if he'll handle a job for her. Asha hands over the dress to him with a serious look. She asks him to please use his skills to fully restore the dress of memories for her family. Lyle looks back at her, ready to take on the responsibility. Lyle thinks to himself about how he could never truly thank these two enough for everything they've done. Asha notices him staring and looks back at him with a bit of confusion. Asha tells Lyle that since he's being so sincere about the request, she's happy to move forward. Lyle looks up at her, taking in the weight of the task she just handed him. They sit across from each other in the lounge, and Asha says it's nice to meet him again properly. She makes it official by using his name, marking a fresh start for their relationship. Asha gives him a huge, beaming smile and a bright response. Lyle can't help but smile back, seeing how much this means to her. Moving on, Asha looks around and asks where Lindo is today. Lyle starts to explain that he's around somewhere, but just then, a leg appears at the door as someone enters. A girl stands in the doorway looking like a total mess, covered in dirt and breathing hard. She desperately tries to get out a few words to get Lyle's attention. Lyle and Asha both turn toward the door, completely surprised by the sudden intrusion. Lyle acknowledges her to see what she needs. The girl is clearly panicking and can barely get her words out. Lyle looks confused and asks what's wrong as the visitor starts bowing. The girl drops into a deep bow, begging Lyle to please fix the item she brought. She sounds like she's at the end of her rope and is putting all her hope in him. She holds out a crumpled, dirty envelope with both hands. Her face is smudged with soot, and she looks like she's been through a lot just to get to the shop. Lyle takes the envelope and looks at it with a puzzled expression. He asks her what exactly this is, since the item is in such bad shape. The visitor shouts that she'll definitely pay for the repair and begs Lyle to take care of it before she turns around and sprints away. Asha looks thoughtful and mentions that she's definitely seen the item the visitor brought in somewhere before. She looks at the damaged piece on the desk and realizes it's actually a hair ornament. Lyle sees her staring and points out she's been thinking about it for a while, and Asha admits that something about the whole situation is really bothering her. Asha wonders why a kid like that would have something so fancy, and when Lyle asks if it could belong to the visitor's mother, she agrees it's a possibility. Looking at the visitor's silhouette, she can't shake the feeling that something is off because the kid clearly looks like he's from the slums. She points out that even though the ornament is broken, the materials are super high-end, which makes her wonder if it might actually be stolen. Lyle knows that people in the slums sometimes turn to crime just to get by, but he tells her he doesn't think that's what's happening this time. He remembers the look on the visitor's face and tells Asha that the kid's eyes were just way too serious for it to be anything but genuine. Asha decides to help out and tells Lyle she'll do some digging to find out where that hair ornament really came from. Asha is pretty surprised and asks if it's really okay for her to get involved and look into the hair ornament. Lyle tells her that since they've already come this far, they should just go for it, and once they've made up their minds, the only thing left is to move. The next day at the Urda Kingdom Castle, Asha is deep in thought, trying to figure out exactly where she saw that specific hair ornament before. She starts searching through everything she can find, looking at portraits and old books, but she hasn't found a match in anything she owns at home or in the stuff she's seen before. She's really determined though, thinking to herself that she wants to do whatever it takes to be useful to Lyle. While walking through the castle, she realizes her father is still going to be busy with his business for a while, but then she spots someone nearby. Asha wonders who the person is at first, but then she realizes it's Princess Fran and quickly apologizes for interrupting her. The young girl, Princess Fran, looks up with a smile and tells Asha it's been a long time, calling her big sister. Fran asks her what she's doing at the castle, so Asha explains that her father is meeting with the king and she's just killing time by taking a walk. After explaining herself, Asha looks at the princess and asks what she was busy doing just before they ran into each other. Fran looks up and casually mentions that she was just busy talking to a flower fairy. Asha gives her a warm smile and says that sounds like a lot of fun, though she's clearly thinking about something else. Asha's expression turns a bit serious as she remembers the other kids in the area whispering about the princess. They had been making fun of Fran, saying she was just pointing her finger at thin air. The kids didn't hold back, gossiping about how she must be making up stories about fairies again even though everyone knows they aren't real. Asha gets caught up in these thoughts and goes quiet for a moment, leading Fran to call out to her to get her attention back. Fran asks if she's got something weighing on her mind, so Asha quickly apologizes and tells her she was just overthinking things for a second. Fran just smiles back at her, but something about the princess's appearance suddenly catches Asha's eye and makes her stop in her tracks. Asha decides to take a chance and addresses Fran properly, telling the princess she has a quick favor to ask. She points out the hair ornament Fran is wearing and asks if she can tell her more about it. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lyle is walking through a narrow alleyway with some pretty beat-up buildings. He stops and looks around, trying to figure out if he's finally reached the right area. Lyle follows the direction the girl ran, but quickly realizes he's ended up in the slums. Looking around at the messy layout of the buildings, he figures it's going to be a total pain to find her in a place this crowded and confusing. Nearby, a group of bullies has cornered the girl, whose name is Tinia. The leader of the group starts harassing her, calling her creepy for always talking to herself. He tells her to hand over her hair ornament, saying someone like her has no business carrying around something that looks so expensive. Tinia doesn't back down though. She stays on the ground but tells them there's no way she's giving it to people like them. The bully doesn't take the rejection well and gets even more aggressive. The bully loses his temper and calls her a cocky little wimp. He winds up a punch, ready to let her have it for talking back to him. Just as the punch is about to land, Lyle steps in and catches the guy's wrist. He tells the bully to stop right there, completely cutting off the attack. The bully gets shoved back and immediately gets defensive. He's clearly rattled and demands to know who Lyle even is. Tinia looks up from the ground, totally shocked to see a stranger stepping in for her. She stares at Lyle, trying to process who he is. Lyle keeps his cool and tells the bullies that he's a friend of the girl. He makes it very clear that he isn't going to let them lay another finger on her. Seeing that Lyle isn't someone they can mess with, the leader decides to bail. He calls out to his buddies to get moving, and the whole group runs away as fast as they can. Once the coast is clear, Lyle reaches out a hand and introduces himself, apologizing for showing up so out of the blue. Tinia looks a bit confused by his friend comment and asks what that whole thing with the other kids was supposed to be about. Tinia explains that the bullies in the area make their living by stealing from people. They targeted her specifically because they knew her hair ornament was worth a lot of money, and it actually ended up breaking during a previous attempt they made to snatch it away. Lyle listens quietly and says he understands the situation now, finally seeing why she was being harassed. Lyle points out that despite her surroundings, Tinia doesn't get involved in their crimes. Tinia confirms this, saying she could never do something like that because the spirits would get angry with her. Lyle is a bit confused by her mention of spirits, but then he remembers the bully's insults. A flashback shows the leader of the group calling Tinia creepy because she's always talking to herself. Tinia asks Lyle if he thinks she's weird too. She explains that she's been able to hear the voices of spirits since she was born, and because of that, everyone treats her like a freak. She's been completely on her own since her parents passed away, which is why she's such an easy target for the local thugs. Even though she's been through a lot, Tinia clenches her fists and says she won't give up that hair ornament no matter what anyone says about her. Lyle looks at her and tells her flat out that he believes her. Lyle gives her a kind smile and says her name, reinforcing the fact that he truly believes in her and what she's saying. He tells her she isn't creepy or crazy for what she does. In his eyes, she was just someone desperately trying to protect a precious memento, even if it was already broken. Lyle reaches out and gently pats her on the head, telling her he thinks she's a really brave girl. Hearing someone finally validate her like that makes Tinia break down into tears. Later, after she's calmed down, Lyle explains that he actually tracked her down because he wanted to ask more about that hair ornament. Tinia feels bad about the earlier encounter and apologizes for running out of his shop so suddenly without explaining herself. Tinia decides she can be open with Lyle because he's the first person who actually believes her. As she starts her story, Lyle's mind drifts back to when he was younger. He remembers meeting another unusual girl who, just like him, had the rare ability to see spirits. The memory takes him back to an old, ruined part of the city. While wandering through the quiet streets, a young Lyle spotted a girl in a white hooded cloak. She wasn't alone. She was surrounded by glowing, butterfly-like spirits that danced around her as she played. Fran noticed him watching and called out to him. Lyle was stunned that she could see him so clearly, immediately wondering if she shared his special gift. Lyle tried to get his bearings as the girl explained her situation. She told him her name was Fran and that she'd come to the city for some fun, but she'd accidentally lost the adults she was with and ended up wandering into the ruin. Lyle listened closely, making sure he had the story straight. Fran looked him over, noting his strange outfit, and asked if he'd ever been to this part of town before. Lyle admitted it was his first time in this specific area, though he jokingly added that getting lost was actually something he did pretty often. Fran went on to explain that she didn't just wander off by accident. She told him the spirits had actually invited her to follow them, and she simply followed their lead until she ended up right there. Hearing that confirmed everything for Lyle. He realized with total certainty that this girl was exactly like him because she could hear the spirits' voices too. Fran started to look a bit concerned, realizing that the people looking after her were probably frantic and searching the whole city for her by now. Seeing her worry, Lyle decided to step up. He told himself he could handle this and promised Fran he would be the one to lead her back to the adults. He reached out and confidently took her hand to show her he meant it. With Fran's hand in his, Lyle started walking. He led the way out of the crumbling ruins, heading back toward the main part of the city to find the people she had lost. Just as Lyle and Fran are making their way out, the royal search party finally catches up to them. The attendants are frantic, shouting out for Princess Fran and wondering where she could have disappeared to. They spot the two of them coming from the ruins. The attendants are flooded with relief once they see she's safe. They tell her everyone has been worried sick and urge her to hurry back to the castle immediately. Lyle stands by, watching as the girl he was just hanging out with is suddenly surrounded by high-ranking staff. Before she leaves, Fran tells Lyle she wants him to have something as a thank you. Lyle looks on, a bit confused, as she reaches up to her hair and pulls out a beautiful hair ornament. She gives him a sweet smile and thanks him for everything he did that day. She then casually tells him that he has a really cute face, so he should probably show it off more instead of hiding it. Lyle absolutely loses it. He's never been complimented like that before, and his face turns a deep shade of red while he flails his arms around in a total panic. He can barely even form a sentence. Once he catches his breath, he tries to turn down the gift, saying there's no way a guy like him is cute. He also points out that the ornament looks incredibly expensive and he can't possibly accept something like that. Fran just smiles and tells him she's not giving it away, she's just lending it to him. She tells him he'll have to come back and return it to her one day. With that, she turns around and walks off with her guards. Lyle is left standing there in the middle of the empty ruins. He's still blushing like crazy and looking totally dazed, now wearing the sparkling hair ornament she left him with. Back in the present, Lyle puts the pieces together and realizes the girl Tinia mentioned is the same one from his past. He asks Tinia if she has any idea who the girl is, thinking that since they both have the gift of talking to spirits, it could be a major lead. Tinia gets quiet and looks down at the ground. She sadly tells him that she isn't able to meet her, which catches Lyle completely off guard. Tinia looks down, her voice trailing off as she drops a major bombshell. She reveals to Lyle that the girl she's been talking about, Fran, is actually the princess of the entire kingdom. Lyle completely loses it, shouting out in disbelief. He can't wrap his head around the fact that a member of the royal family is involved in this, and he wonders how someone of her status ended up meeting a girl like Tinia. Tinia admits that the news shocked her at first too. However, since that day in the ruins, she's been using her ability to communicate with spirits to keep in touch with Fran and talk about everything under the sun. She goes on to explain that despite their bond, she doesn't feel like she's in a position to actually go and see the princess. She's just an orphan from the slums while Fran is royalty, and under normal circumstances, people from such different worlds would never even lay eyes on each other. Even with the social gap between them, Tinia tells Lyle that she didn't stay silent. She sent another message to Fran through the spirits just the other day to keep their connection alive. A memory of Fran flashes back, where the princess smiled and spoke about a time in the future. Tinia sits on a crate, looking off into the distance while thinking about that promise. She says she wants to work as hard as she can so that one day she can become a respectable person worthy of standing by her friend. In another flashback, Fran is shown smiling brightly. She tells Tinia that she's waiting for the day Tinia comes to find her and returns the favor using her own strength and success. Back in the present, Tinia clenches her fist with a determined look in her eyes. She vows that she is going to make it happen and see the princess again on her own terms, which leaves Lyle looking pretty impressed by her resolve. Lyle gives a small smile, finally understanding where she's coming from. He tells her that if she's that serious about changing her life, there's only one thing he can do to help. He promises to fix her request perfectly and says he'll be there to back her up as many times as it takes for her to reach her goal. Lyle looks at the item in his hand with a big smile, feeling the weight of the task. He tells Tinia that he's definitely going to deliver her feelings to the princess. Tinia is so overwhelmed that she starts crying while smiling, thanking him for everything. Lyle looks a bit surprised by her reaction, but decides it's time to move forward. As they look out over the city, Lyle asks Tina how she'd feel about having someone around who could actually help her out and become her strength. A few days pass after their conversation. Lyle is sitting in an office with Asha, catching her up on everything. Asha mentions that they've both been sticking their noses into things quite a bit, and Lyle agrees before asking if Princess Fran feels the same way Tina does. Asha gives a soft, knowing smile. She tells him that the princess said she would wait however long it takes for Tina to come find her using her own strength. Asha thinks about how crazy the whole thing is. She points out that these are two people from completely different worlds who only met because they could both hear the voices of spirits. She says the whole situation feels like something straight out of a fairy tale. Lyle smiles, agreeing that it really does seem that way. Asha then asks what happened to Tina after their talk. Lyle starts to explain, but he gets interrupted. Just then, the door opens and Lindo walks in wearing her armor. She greets them, saying it's been a while, and Lyle laughs, telling her they were just talking about her. Just as they're finishing up their talk, Tina peeks her head into the room and calls out to Lyle. She walks in looking totally different and tells Lyle and Asha that she's heading out with Lindo. It's a big day because she's finally taking on her very first job as an adventurer. Tina holds out a sword with a huge smile on her face. She asks Lyle if he can handle the repairs on her weapon before she heads out. Lyle and Asha both look at her, seeing how much she's changed. Lyle gives her a big nod and says he's happy to take the job. The mood shifts somewhere else. A hand reaches out to touch a damaged piece of paper, and a voice says they aren't going to let this go. Turns out it's an elf who looks absolutely furious. He clenches his fist and says he'll never forgive that cursed repairer. Lyle starts thinking back to when he was a kid. His father, Shatsu, was arguing with his grandfather, asking why he kept bringing Lyle to the workshop and if he was trying to force the kid into an apprenticeship. Shatsu was totally against it. He yelled that he had zero intention of ever letting his son become a repairer. The grandfather looked pretty defeated. He tried to get a word in, calling out to Shatsu, but it didn't seem like he was being heard. Shatsu kept going, complaining that his father was always shut away in the shop doing nothing but work. He told the old man that he didn't have a clue how he or his mother actually felt. The memory of Lyle's father, Shatsu, continues. He mocks the idea of his own father being called the best repairer in the capital, looking completely disgusted with the profession. The grandfather just looks down at the item in his hands, looking exhausted. He repeats the word feelings to himself, clearly affected by his son's harsh words. As the grandfather walks away into the distance, a young Lyle stands there watching him go. It feels like nothing has really changed for Lyle since those days in the workshop. Just then, Lyle snaps awake in his bed, covered in sweat. He realizes it was all just a bad dream and tries to shake off the heavy feeling from the memory. He looks out toward the royal castle and remembers that today is actually the big day he's been waiting for. Later on, Lyle is at the castle practicing his formal greeting. He gets down on one knee and tries to act all proper, but Asha just looks at him and tells him he's being super weird. Suddenly, a loud laugh echoes through the room. Turns out it's the king himself. He has a big smile on his face and tells Lyle to relax and stop being so stiff. Lyle laughs nervously while scratching his head, still unable to believe he's actually standing in front of royalty. As the king sits on his throne with Princess Fran standing nearby, Lyle thinks about how crazy it is to get a personal summons like this. The king tells him that rumors about a legendary repairer have been spreading all over the castle lately. Lyle thinks to himself that while he's glad to be busy, the sudden surge in noble customers has been pretty overwhelming. The king then mentions that he's heard all about how much Lyle has helped his daughter Fran. The king tells Lyle he has a special request for him today, but he tells him to just relax and listen to the details first. Lyle asks what kind of item he'll be working on. The king presents a box containing an incredibly old and damaged document, telling Lyle that this is the item in question. Lyle stares at the worn-out pages in shock and asks what it actually is. Asha steps in and explains that it's the original scripture of the Saint Lugnica religion. Lyle recognizes the name and mentions how it was the oldest religion in the Urda kingdom, followed by ancient elves hundreds of years ago. The king nods and confirms that Lyle knows his history well. The scripture is legendary because the ancient elven characters written inside actually hold magical power within the ink itself. Back in the day, just speaking the words for things like fire or ice would make them happen, even if the person talking didn't have a drop of magic in them. It was basically a book of powerful ancient miracles. But that's not the case anymore. The religion died out a long time ago, and now the ancient elven script is treated like a lost, phantom language that nobody really uses. The king looks Lyle right in the eye and addresses him formally by his title as a repairer. He tells Lyle that he wants him to be the one to repair the book. Lyle is completely floored and asks if the king is sure about letting him handle such a priceless historical treasure. The king explains that they actually tried to have it repaired decades ago, but it clearly didn't work out given the state it's in now. He says they have to keep it in good shape for the sake of the kingdom's history and for researching ancient magic, which is why it needs a master's touch. Lyle mentions that he's worried about not being able to read the ancient elven script while he works on the book, but a voice from off-screen tells him there's no need to worry about that. The king tells someone it's time to come in, and the door opens as a new person walks into the room. A young man enters and says it's an honor to meet them, introducing himself as Tyro. Tyro bows and explains that he's come all the way from the elven village specifically to help Lyle with the repair work. He smiles and says that from today until the repairs are officially finished, he'll be right there by Lyle's side to help with the deciphering. The king looks at Lyle and asks him directly if he's willing to take on the responsibility of the task. Later on, Princess Fran looks at her father and asks him what he's actually thinking. She follows up by asking what he meant by his earlier comments, looking pretty serious about it. As she walks with Lyle, she tells her father not to hide things, saying she knows there's definitely another reason why he picked Lyle for this specific job. The king just gives a little chuckle to himself and keeps his eyes closed, not letting any more secrets out for now. The king leans on his cane and says he thinks he'll stick around to observe Lyle's skills for a bit. He tells Lyle to go ahead and show him what he's capable of. Looking out at the castle, the king thinks to himself about how he wants to see just how worthy the grandson of his old friend actually is. Lyle gets to work at his desk, carefully using his tools to scrape away at the damaged pages. He thinks about the ancient elven script, noting that these characters are supposed to house a mysterious kind of magical power. As he examines the worn-down text, Lyle reflects on how ancient magical theories were eventually simplified and replaced by the modern magic used today. It's why he's heard that hardly anyone even bothers to study or research this old language anymore. Sitting alone at his workbench, Lyle thinks that if he actually manages to pull off this repair, he'd love to see the ancient magic from those elven characters in action at least once. Lyle lets out a long sigh of relief as he looks over the book, thinking the binding is finally looking okay. He tells himself that if he's going to fix this, it has to be absolutely perfect, but just then Tyro calls out his name. Tyro shows up with some tea and a big smile, asking if maybe it's time for a little rest. Lyle is a bit surprised to see him, but he agrees that taking a break sounds like a good plan. While they sit near the window, Tyro asks how the progress on the book is going. Lyle tells him that while he's managed to get the binding under control, there's still a bigger problem to deal with. Lyle explains that the real issue is the content of the pages, since the insect damage is pretty bad and the ink is fading significantly. He tells Tyro that it'll be a bit longer before they can start on the translation work together. As they sit across from each other at the table, Tyro asks Lyle who taught him all these impressive repair techniques. Lyle realizes he's asking about his master. Tyro smiles and mentions how impressive it is that someone as young as Lyle already has his own shop and is taking direct requests from the king. He tells Lyle that he really thinks he's a gifted person. Lyle looks a bit humble and says he doesn't think he's anyone special. He explains that his master was actually his grandfather, who was also a repairer. Moving on, Lyle notes that since his grandfather passed away when he was still just a kid, a lot of the memories he has from that time are pretty fuzzy. Tyro gets curious and asks if Lyle would be willing to tell him a bit more about his grandfather. Lyle is a little surprised that Tyro is so interested in the topic. Lyle looks down at his tea and says the stories aren't really that exciting, but he decides he can share a few things. He explains that the workshop they're in was actually left to him by his grandfather. He mentions how he used to spend all his time there as a kid, watching his grandfather work and even pretending to do repairs himself. Tyro asks if that's what set Lyle on the path to becoming a professional repairer. Lyle confirms it, explaining that back in the day, his grandfather was a well-known repairer in the capital and taught him everything he knows. While thinking back, Lyle says that out of all the lessons his grandfather gave him, there's one specific thing that really stuck with him the most. Lyle smiles and says his grandfather taught him that a repairer needs to stay close to the client and help preserve the feelings they've put into their belongings. He says his grandfather always told him that's the most important part of the job. He finishes by saying that no matter what the item is, it always has a story behind it and holds the memories of the time the client spent with it. While holding his tea, Lyle continues his deep talk about the job. He explains that human emotions are basically invisible and different for everyone, which is what makes repairing things so complicated. He looks back at the ancient scripture and mentions that even his grandfather admitted it took him a really long time to fully wrap his head around that concept. Lyle suddenly snaps out of it and starts freaking out a little. He apologizes for talking Tyro's ear off, admitting he doesn't usually share these kinds of stories and just got caught up in the moment. Tyro stays totally chill and tells him it's fine. He actually apologizes back, saying he was the one digging for details and asking too many questions. Lyle realizes that this is actually a perfect setup. Since he can't read the ancient elven script himself, having Tyro there to translate the actual feelings and history packed into the book is exactly what he needs. Feeling motivated, Lyle looks Tyro in the eye and says he's going to give this repair everything he's got. He officially asks Tyro to lend him his strength so they can get it done right. Tyro gives him a soft smile and agrees to help out. However, the atmosphere shifts slightly, and Lyle wonders if something is up with Tyro's reaction. Lyle then suggests that since he shared so much, he'd love to hear about Tyro's life too. He asks if Tyro can tell him about his hometown and elven history once they have some downtime. Tyro says he'd be happy to, but he suddenly stands up and says he just remembered something he has to do. He excuses himself, apologizing for interrupting the work and saying they'll have to save his stories for another day. Tyro heads out, his boots clicking against the floor as he leaves the room. As he walks away, he keeps his expression blank, but he's thinking about how getting close to the person you're working with is just a necessary part of the process. Once he's out of sight, Tyro's face twists with anger. He grips his clothes tightly, fuming over Lyle's attitude. He can't believe the grandson of the man known as the worst repairer, Lyle disguise, would talk to him like that. Back in the workshop, Lyle watches Tyro leave and feels like the vibe was definitely off. He mentions to himself that the elf was acting pretty strange and wonders if something happened to upset him. Lyle turns his attention back to the massive scripture and starts flipping through it. He stops when he notices that one specific page has been completely torn out of the book. He examines the area around the tier, noting that the pages are blank on both sides and there's no sign of anyone trying to shove extra pages in there recently. Just then, he remembers a detail the king mentioned during their meeting. He recalls the king telling him that someone actually tried to repair this book several decades ago. Looking at the damage, Lyle finds it hard to believe that such a significant historical document was allowed to fall into this kind of state. Lyle decides he needs a reference point. He thinks that even if he can't find an identical match, looking through similar repair records might give him a clue on how to handle the ancient book. He starts browsing through the shelves to find a lid. He pulls out a worn-out folder that's packed with messy notes. As he looks closer, he realizes it's a dictionary or a guide of some sort, and it's filled with ancient elven script. While digging through the materials, he finds another old book that catches his eye. He notices a bookmark peeking out from between the pages and wonders what this one is about. He opens it up and quickly realizes he's looking at a personal diary. The first page he sees contains an entry discussing a request from that specific day. Lyle thinks back to a memory that feels totally ridiculous now. In the flashback, a man in a work apron asks if the whole job is really just about fixing up some old books. The client gets annoyed, telling the repairer it's not just a book but a holy scripture. He says they came to him because he's supposedly the best in the capital and reminds him that this is a formal request from the government. The man in the apron, Lord Roan, just scoffs at the praise. He says being called the best in the capital is a pretty low standard. He looks back with total confidence and tells the client there isn't anything in the world he can't fix. Back in the present day, Lyle is staring at the ancient book and realizes he's stuck. He admits to himself that he actually can't read a single word of the text. He leans back in his chair, feeling over the whole thing. He thinks the request is a joke and says he doesn't really care if it's a holy scripture or what. Lyle looks at the old pages and wonders what could possibly make a musty book like this so valuable. He lets out a tired sigh to vent some frustration. Just as he's relaxing, someone walks into the shop and speaks up to get his attention. Lyle is caught off guard by the visitor. He turns around and wonders who would even be showing up at his place this early in the morning. A beautiful elf woman is standing there at the entrance. She announces to him that she has traveled all the way from the elven village. Lyle is completely floored by her and starts blushing. The woman introduces herself, telling him that her name is Eliza. Eliza explains that the chief of her village was the one who accepted the request to have the scripture fixed. Lyle is standing there totally dazed and blushing, barely keeping it together as he remembers being told he needs to help Lord Roan with the job. Eliza looks at him and asks if that's really the case. Lyle is still bright red, clearly affected by her being there. Lyle starts laughing loudly to cover up his nerves, acting like it's no big deal. He walks off into the middle of the room, still laughing to himself. Eliza is a bit confused by his reaction and brings the conversation back to the task at hand. She asks him what exactly the plan is for repairing the scripture. Lyle gets serious for a second and tells her that since he's the one who took on this job, he's going to handle the whole thing by himself. Eliza doesn't quite get why he's being so insistent and asks him what he means by that. Lyle explains his reasoning, saying that if he had to rely on someone else's help to get the job done, it would be a total disgrace to his name as a repairer. Eliza is surprised he cares that much about his reputation. Lyle doubles down, boasting that he's the top repairer in the capital and even calls himself the best in the entire world. Eliza listens to his bragging, but then asks if he can really fix all the memories attached to it. Lyle looks at her, feeling a bit confused by the way she worded that. Eliza clarifies, telling him that the scripture is an incredibly important item that has been passed down through the elven race for hundreds of years. Eliza goes on to explain that the scripture is way more than just a book, because it holds the records of their ancestors' faith and the actual teachings of Saint Lugnica. It basically covers everything about their ancient culture, their way of life, and the entire history of their people. She points out that since the elven population is shrinking, this one book is a massive deal. It's a treasure left behind by those who came before them, and it absolutely has to be saved for the future generation. Eliza also mentions that the text is super complicated. She tells Lyle that unless someone actually understands ancient elf script, there's no way they could ever restore it to how it's supposed to be. Lyle just stands there listening to her with a totally blank look on his face. But then, Lyle just starts laughing like it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. He stands there with his hands on his hips and tells her that a job like that is actually incredibly easy for him. He keeps grinning and asks her why it matters, saying that as long as he puts the book back exactly the way it was, every single problem should be solved. Lyle's expression shifts a bit as he repeats the word feelings or thoughts back to her, sounding pretty skeptical about the whole thing. He looks totally bored and says that human emotions are just nonsense since you can't actually fix them anyway. He reminds her that he's just a repairer, so he doesn't care about the meaning behind the words or the documents. To him, as long as the physical object looks right again, nothing else matters. Just then, a hand slams down hard on the table right next to the scripture. Lyle is thinking about the fact that this isn't just any job, it's a direct request from the king. He gets this dark, intense look in his eyes as he realizes what's at stake. He knows that if he manages to pull this off, he'll officially be the top repairer in the whole country. Lyle clenches his fist over the ancient text, looking more determined than ever. He tells himself that there isn't a single thing in the world he can't handle. Lyle slams his hand down on the ancient book, but he suddenly stops and breaks into a sweat when he sees the damage. The page is completely split down the middle, and it looks way worse than he expected. Lyle turns around quickly, clearly feeling the pressure. Eliza just stands there in total silence for a moment before she starts to lose it, calling out his grandfather's name in despair. Lyle grabs Eliza by the arms to try and calm her down. He tells her it's going to be fine and reminds her that he's the best repairer in the capital. He promises that even though it's torn, he can fix it so it looks exactly like it used to. Just then, a strange, dark aura starts rising from the tear in the book. A heavy sound fills the room as the energy leaks out, making the situation feel a lot more serious. Eliza and Lyle both stare at the book in total shock. They look completely stunned, watching as the mysterious mist continues to pour out of the scripture. Lyle starts to freak out, asking what's happening, but Eliza just breaks down. She covers her face and sobs, saying it's already too late and that she really thought she could trust him. Eliza keeps crying into her hands, saying that the book was the most important thing to her people. She's devastated because it was the only one in the entire world, and she can't believe such a terrible thing just happened. Lyle looks down, feeling absolutely terrible about what he's done. He realizes that you don't truly know how important something is until it's gone, and he starts thinking about how stupid he was to be so arrogant. Standing alone in his workshop, Lyle is still stuck in his own head, beating himself up for being so foolish. He quietly calls out to his grandfather, feeling completely lost. Lyle thinks back to a memory of himself and finds a spark of determination. He tells himself that he's the only one who can handle this and that he can't let things end on such a sad note. He looks at the book one more time and tells his grandfather to leave the rest to him. In a flashback, Eliza holds the scripture and calls out to Tyro. She has a huge smile on her face as she tells him that this specific book is filled with magic meant to bring happiness to a lot of people. Tyro asks her what magic of happiness even means. Eliza explains that he's right, but because the book has gotten so old, the magic inside of it has started to fade away. She looks up at a massive, bare tree standing near them. She starts telling him a story about how things used to be with this tree a long time ago. As they walk together, Eliza explains that back then, they used the magic from the scripture to make the tree bloom. She says it used to be covered in these beautiful peach-colored flowers. She goes on to say that the flowers made everyone feel calm. It's even said that the magic ended the fighting between humans and demi-humans, basically guiding everyone toward a peaceful life. Eliza tells Tyro she heard rumors about a legendary repairer in the capital who can fix literally anything. Tyro gets excited, realizing that Eliza is planning to go to the capital just so she can bring back everyone's smiles. Eliza smiles brightly and confirms it. She says she wants to get that person to fix the scripture so she can see the flowers on the tree bloom at least one more time. She looks at Tyro with a lot of hope in her eyes. She tells him to just wait for her and that she'll be back soon. The memory shifts to a darker scene where everyone is gathered around, sounding devastated. Tyro stands alone in the shadows, feeling crushed by the weight of the situation and thinking that everything that happened is entirely his fault. The scene returns to the present where Eliza is completely losing it. She's collapsed on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably and apologizing over and over again while clutching the ruined book. Tyro sits at his desk, completely frozen. The realization of what's happening seems to hit him all at once as he stares blankly into the room. He clenches his fist tightly against the table, looking down with a pained expression. He thinks about how humans have such short lives, aging and dying so fast, and how they often leave their mistakes and sins behind for others to deal with. Lyle stands by the doorway of the office, looking across the room at Tyro. He calls out Tyro's name and directly asks for his help, telling him he needs to borrow his strength for what comes next. Walking further into the room with a package in his arms, Lyle explains that he finally understands the whole situation. He tells Tyro that he knows the truth about the ancient scripture and the history involving his grandfather. Tyro looks away, sounding completely skeptical. He says he can't believe Lyle is actually the grandson of that famous repairer, the one who was legendary for connecting with his clients' emotions while he worked. Lyle stays calm, but there's a bit of a heavy mood as he looks off to the side. He says that if they move forward with this, it's probably just going to be a repeat of the same old cycle. Tyro watches him from across the room and brings up Eliza. He says that things are going to end up exactly the way they did for her back then. This seems to click for Lyle, and he looks a bit surprised. He admits he's had a strange feeling about the situation ever since the two of them first met. Tyro stares back with a serious look, wondering to himself if Lyle actually showed up here already knowing every single detail about the past. He asks Lyle if the real reason he came to this place was to atone for the sins his grandfather, Roand, committed so long ago. Tyro admits that was his plan all along. He explains that when the request to fix the scripture came from the Urda kingdom, he really thought his chance for revenge had finally arrived, but then he found out the man he blamed was already dead. He continues, saying the man did something that could never be taken back and died without ever making up for his sins. Lyle stays quiet as he listens. Then Tyro asks him what he thinks happened to the woman involved after everything went down. Looking back, that day completely changed the woman's life for the worse. She ended up broken, curled up on the ground in total despair. Because she was the one in charge of the scripture, she felt the full weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. The guilt was so massive that it started eating her alive from the inside. Moving on, things got so bad that she just stopped smiling entirely. A younger Tyro could only watch from a distance as she withered away. Tyro tells Lyle flat out that his grandfather ruined a woman's life, but then he quickly corrects himself. He says it's even worse than that, claiming the man actually stole all hope away from the entire elf race. The woman is shown sitting alone in a dark room, looking completely hollowed out. Lyle starts to realize the scale of the damage and wonders how much regret his grandfather must have left behind and how many lives he actually made miserable. He looks at Tyro and tries to say his name. Tyro just loses it and starts screaming. He tells Lyle he's exactly like his grandfather, only caring about his own pride and reputation instead of the work. He yells that Lyle doesn't even try to understand what the client is going through and there's no way someone like him could ever fix the scripture. Lyle suddenly barks out Tyro's name to cut him off. The shout is so sharp that Tyro completely freezes up and goes quiet, looking shocked that Lyle actually raised his voice. Lyle looks down at his hands and admits that his grandfather did something that can never be forgiven. He knows that no matter how bad he feels about it now, his regret won't change the pain that Tyro and Eliza had to go through. Lyle bows his head deeply toward Tyro and gives him a sincere apology for everything that happened in the past. As Tyro watches him, Lyle explains that he isn't saying sorry because he expects to be forgiven. He knows that the years they lost because of his grandfather's mistake might never truly come back. Lyle tells him that even though the damage is done, he wants to at least try to fix the mess his grandfather made. He's determined to get those broken gears moving again, even if it's just for this one project. He looks Tyro right in the face and asks for his trust. He insists that he's the only one who can actually pull this off. Lyle explains that while the repair failed years ago, his grandfather actually left behind some clues. It turns out the old man wrote down notes in his diary about how the scripture was supposed to be fixed. Tyro's hands start shaking as he grips his sleeve, feeling frustrated and asking why all of this is only being said now after so much time has passed. Tyro snaps that working with ancient elf script is incredibly dangerous because the letters will literally vanish if even a tiny mistake is made. He yells that you can't just fix the surface, you have to actually understand the soul and meaning behind the words to succeed. Lyle agrees and tells Tyro that's exactly why he needs his help for the very last part. He He says he needs Tyro's knowledge of the script to properly fix the final page, leaving Tyro looking completely floored and wondering why he's being asked. Lyle finishes by saying he wants to complete the job his grandfather couldn't finish. He wants to do a real repair so he can return the scripture to the elves and finally bring some hope back to their people. Tyro breaks down into tears, clutching the package tightly. He tells Lyle that he doesn't want him to be stuck in the past anymore either, showing that he's finally letting go of the grudge he held against Lyle's family. Tyro takes a second to compose himself and wipes his eyes. Lyle watches him closely, and eventually Tyro looks up and says he understands. With tears still in his eyes but a new look of determination, Tyro looks directly at Lyle. He says he wants to try this one more time. Tyro officially gives them his answer, telling Lyle and the others that he has decided to put his trust in them. Lyle looks relieved and happy to finally have him on board. Sometime later, back at the shop, Asha is catching up with Lyle. She asks if he really just handed the scripture over to the elves like that. Lyle explains that he did because he knows there are people who actually need that book more than anyone else. Asha says that sounds exactly like something he would do. Lyle starts to freak out a little, wondering how he's supposed to explain the missing scripture to the king. Asha tells him not to worry and says she'll go with him. She promises to talk to the king and set things up so he'll be cool with the decision. As they sit over tea, Asha points out that given the history of the item and the fact that it originally belonged to the elves, the king is bound to be understanding once they explain the situation. Lyle's face lights up and he tells Asha she's a lifesaver. He gives her a huge smile and thanks her for having his back. Asha looks at him curiously over her teacup. She changes the subject and asks whatever happened with that magic of happiness he was talking about before. Lyle just gives a coy answer, saying he wonders about that. Asha doesn't appreciate the mystery and starts pinching his face, complaining that he's being difficult by not just telling her. Despite the teasing, Lyle sits back with a soft smile, looking genuinely happy with how things turned out. The story shifts as someone starts to explain a situation. In a quiet room by a window, the explanation begins. Tyro is seen sprinting through the middle of a thick forest. He's moving with a lot of urgency, clearly trying to get somewhere important as fast as he can. He finally makes it to a large, impressive building. Tyro stands before the massive front doors, completely wiped out and gasping for air after his long run. Inside the house, Eliza looks toward the entrance with a bit of a distant expression. She asks who's at the door. Tyro stands in the doorway and greets her, saying it's been a long time. He introduces himself so she knows exactly who he is. The conversation moves inside to a bright room. Someone tells Eliza to take a look out the window and keep her eyes fixed on the great tree without looking away. A hand reaches out and presents a piece of paper to her. The person calls her name to get her attention. As Eliza takes the paper, a thought comes up about how beautiful it is to actually believe in someone. She looks down at the document, and the narration continues. It turns out that having that kind of trust is pretty much the only way for people to stay connected to each other. Eliza looks at the handwriting on the paper and can't believe her eyes. She asks if this is really from Roand, her eye wide with shock as she processes what she's reading. In the letter, Roand looks back on his younger self, laughing about how uneducated and full of himself he used to be. He admits his immaturity was the reason he ended up hurting Eliza so much in the past. Roand explains that he carried that regret with him all the way into his old age. He thought about trying to fix things or even going to see her, but he felt like he didn't have the right to show his face after the way he ruined her life. He spent his final years wondering how to pay for his mistakes, knowing that time only moves forward and never gives you a second chance. But then he mentions there's actually one way to push back against time, and it's something only a repairer is capable of doing. We see a memory of him at a desk with a young Lyle, passing down his knowledge. Roand writes that he got lucky because he found a kid who is way more talented than he ever was. He expresses his total confidence that Lyle will be the one to carry on his legacy and his will. Because of that, he asks her for a huge favor. The letter wraps up with a simple, heartfelt plea for things to go back to how they were in the old days. Eliza can't hold it back anymore and starts crying as she finishes the letter. Looking out at Lyle through the window, she realizes just how much warmth and kindness Roand put into this final message. The scene shifts to a different room where a man is losing his temper. He yells at a customer to shut up, telling them that if they don't like the way he does repairs, they can take their business elsewhere. The customer is just as heated, asking the man who he thinks he is to talk to a client like that. He says he's done with him and is going to find a younger repairer who people actually like. The man stays silent as the customer storms out. Just as he's sitting there alone at his desk, someone speaks up and addresses him as Lord Luzin. Lena asks Luzin if it was really a good idea to chase away their latest customer, especially since they haven't had any business in a long time. Luzin isn't in the mood for a lecture and tells her to shut up, asking if she thinks she has the right to boss him around too. Luzin changes the subject entirely, asking Lena how she's actually feeling physically. Lena admits that things aren't great and explains that she still feels a lot of discomfort running from her right thigh all the way up to her shoulder. Luzin just gives a short acknowledgement while sitting at his desk, looking clearly stressed. Lena notices his strange vibe and asks if something is wrong with him. He gets up and walks away from his workspace, waving her off and telling her it's nothing. Luzin decides to call it quits for the day, muttering that he's just not feeling right as he walks off, leaving Lena looking worried. Back at his own shop, Lyle is in a great mood, humming a tune while he carefully polishes his work table. Suddenly, the door opens and Lyle looks over with a bright smile, giving a warm welcome to whoever just walked in. The visitors turn out to be Luzin and Lena. Luzin immediately starts trash-talking the shop, saying he expected something better but found a pathetic-looking place instead. While Lena tries to be polite and excuses their entrance, Luzin just plops himself down in a chair. Lyle tries to keep things professional and asks if they're there to submit a repair request. Luzin responds with total hostility, asking why else he'd ever set foot in a place like this, and calling Lyle an idiot for even asking. Lyle is completely caught off guard by the intrusion, wondering what kind of person just barges into a shop like that without warning. Lena tries to smooth things over by apologizing for the sudden entrance. She introduces the man sitting on the sofa as Lord Luzin, a professional repairer, and then introduces herself as his assistant. Lyle is totally confused, repeating the word repairer back to them. He can't figure out why another professional in the same field would bother coming to his specific shop. Luzin gets straight to the point, gesturing toward Lena and saying he wants Lyle to handle a repair for her. The request throws Lyle for a loop. He's never heard of repairing a person before and asks for clarification on what that even means. After a moment of looking closer, things finally click for Lyle. He realizes that Lena isn't actually human, she's a highly advanced automaton. Lyle is genuinely impressed, telling them he's never seen an automaton that functions with such a high level of independence and detail. Luzin takes the compliment as his due, arrogantly pointing out that it makes sense she's perfect since he's the one who built her. Wanting to get to work, Lyle asks if he can take a closer look at her. He starts to reach out to examine Lena's hand to see what needs fixing. Just as he reaches out, Luzin loses it. He suddenly lunges forward and grabs Lyle by the collar, shouting at him to back off. Luzin suddenly loses his temper, shouting at Lyle to keep his hands off any parts of Lena that aren't related to the repair. Lena looks back, caught off guard by her master's aggressive reaction, while Lyle stands there in silence, completely stunned by the outburst. Still being held by his collar, Lyle tries to defend himself. He explains that if he's actually going to fix her, he has no choice but to examine her properly first. Luzin tells Lyle to shut up and lets go of him. He walks away, dismissively stating that Lyle just needs to focus on fixing the specific malfunction and nothing else. As he heads toward the door, Luzin stops to give a final warning. He calls Lyle a youngster and tells him to listen closely to what happens if he fails. With a cold look, Luzin threatens Lyle, saying that if he screws up this repair, he'll make sure Lyle's body is damaged so badly he'll never be able to walk again. Once Luzin is gone, Lena turns to Lyle. She looks concerned and immediately offers a sincere apology for her master's behavior. Lena bows deeply to show how sorry she is. She asks Lyle to please forgive Luzin's rude attitude, explaining that she's apologizing on his behalf. Lyle watches her, still feeling the weight of the situation. Despite the heavy threat hanging over him, Luzin asks one last time if Lyle is actually willing to take on the job. Lyle looks back, his expression turning serious as he considers the high-stakes request. Lyle doesn't back down. He tells Luzin that he understands the terms and officially accepts the request to repair Lena. Later that night, Lyle gets to work in his shop. As he examines Lena's leg, he's blown away by the craftsmanship. He thinks to himself that the technology is so advanced it's easy to see why people mistake her for a human, especially since she even has mechanical parts that mimic a human's nervous system. As Lyle examines Lena's mechanical leg, he realizes how high the stakes are. He thinks to himself that if he messes up even one tiny detail, she'll just stop moving completely. He's honestly stunned by how complex the engineering is. Lena notices Lyle staring at her leg with such a serious expression and tilts her head. She asks if there's something wrong. Lyle looks up and asks her if Lord Luzin was the one who originally built her. Lena looks back and confirms that as far as she knows, that's correct. Lena explains that while her memory of her early days isn't perfect, Luzin was the only person around when she was first activated. Lyle follows up by asking if Luzin handled all of her maintenance by himself too, and Lena tells him that he did. She goes on to explain that every single time her master performed maintenance, he would add new features and functions to her body. A memory flashes back to Luzin working tirelessly in his workshop, surrounded by tools and bottles dedicated to refining her design. Lena stands there, explaining that because of all those constant updates, she eventually became able to move and behave just like she does now. Lyle takes this in and starts to see the bigger picture. He wonders what Luzin's actual goal was for creating someone like her. Looking at how closely her appearance and movements mimic a real girl, he gets the feeling that Luzin wasn't just building a robot. He was trying to create an actual human being. Lena looks at Lyle with a soft, sincere smile. She tells him that despite how he acts, her master is actually a very kind person. The comment catches Lyle completely off guard. He looks at her in shock, unable to reconcile her description with the aggressive man who just threatened to break his legs. Lena's expression turns a bit more complicated as she adds that to Luzin, she's really just an assistant and nothing more. Lena explains that even though her master says he can just build a new girl if she breaks, he always works like crazy to fix her whenever she has a problem. Lyle realizes that to her, Luzin is actually someone very different from the person he's seen. He starts to wonder if there's more to the old man's behavior than just being a jerk. It's honestly hard to believe, but Lena has something that normal automatons just don't have. It's impressive that Luzin managed to build someone this complex and keep her running all on his own for so long. Lyle gets lost in thought, wondering why a guy like that would suddenly trust a total stranger with his most important creation. Lena notices him spacing out and asks if he's okay. Lyle snaps out of it and tells Lena that there's actually something he's been meaning to ask her. The scene shifts to Luzin's shop, where the old man is currently kicking a customer out. He's yelling at the guy for complaining about his repair work and tells him to never show his face there again, calling him a total amateur. Lyle walks into the back room and tentatively calls out to Luzin. The old man looks up from his drink, looking pretty annoyed that he's being interrupted. Luzin tells Lyle to just find a seat wherever he can. As Lyle sits down, he can't help but notice that the entire room reeks of alcohol. Luzin doesn't waste any time and asks Lyle point-blank if Lena can actually be fixed. Lyle starts to answer, but then he turns the question back on the old man. He asks Luzin why he even decided to trust him with Lena in the first place. Luzin isn't in the mood for games and tells Lyle to stop answering a question with another question. Lyle tries to explain himself, saying it's not that he's making excuses, he just finds the whole situation mysterious. Luzin just grunts the word back at him, clearly not impressed. Lyle gets serious and tells Luzin that he has high-level skills that Lyle doesn't even have yet. He points out that Luzin is the one who actually built a girl so perfect she's basically human, which is a massive feat. Lyle keeps going, saying that creating a person like that should be impossible even with alchemy. He finally asks the big question, why would someone with that much talent come to a guy like him for a repair? Luzin asks if Lyle really came all the way there just to ask something that stupid. He tells him to just shut up and focus on doing the job he was hired for. But then Luzin stops being a jerk for a second. He points to his face and reveals that his eyes don't really see much of anything anymore. The news hits Lyle hard, and he just stands there in total shock, unable to believe what he's hearing. Luzin explains that his vision has been fading for a long time, and he's not sure if it's the cheap booze or just old age catching up to him. Because he can't see right, he admits he can't even do his work the way he used to. Lyle stays quiet as the reality of the situation sinks in. Luzin scratches his head, looking pretty defeated as he says there's nothing left he can do for her himself. Looking at the ground, Lyle finally connects the dots. He realizes this is exactly why Luzin swallowed his pride and came to him for help with the repairs. Luzin admits he's just an old man who doesn't have much time left. He says he created her out of his own selfishness and a drive for perfection, but now he's terrified of leaving her all alone when he dies. Lyle tries to make sense of things and asks Luzin why he'd go through all the trouble of creating her just for his own satisfaction. Luzin looks pretty drained and just says the whole thing is actually a really stupid story. As Luzin looks at an empty, dusty picture frame on the table, he starts to open up. He tells Lyle that back in the day, he actually had a daughter. In a flashback to a quiet night at their old house, a younger Luzin comes home after a long day. He calls out to Lena as he walks through the door. A young girl with a bright smile rushes to greet him. She looks genuinely happy to see him and welcomes him home. Luzin asks her how she's feeling today, looking at her with a lot of affection. He tells her he's sorry he couldn't be around to spend more time with her during the day. Lena beams at him and says she feels totally fine. She credits the medicine her dad has been getting her for keeping her energy up. Sitting in her bed with a bowl of food, Lena tells her dad how much she appreciates him working so hard for her every day. She says that even though her mom isn't around anymore, she's perfectly happy as long as she has him. She keeps going, saying her big goal is to get healthy as fast as possible. She wants to start working so her dad doesn't have to carry the load alone anymore, and that way they can stay together forever. Luzin looks around the quiet room and softly thanks her for saying that. In another memory, Luzin practically bursts through the front door with supplies in hand. He apologizes for being late getting home and tells Lena he's going to get dinner started for her right away. In a flashback, a younger Luzin comes home with supplies, feeling optimistic. He tells Lena that he's lined up a major job for a nobleman, and once it's finished, he'll be getting a huge payout. Luzin is actually smiling for once, looking genuinely happy. He says that with that kind of money, he'll be able to afford much better medicine for her, and he's sure she'll finally get better. But the mood shifts instantly. Lena is lying perfectly still in her bed, her arm limp and hanging off the side, showing no signs of life. Coming into the room, Luzin stops in his tracks. He looks at her and tentatively calls out her name, feeling a sudden sense of dread. He tries to act like everything is normal at first, telling her he made her favorite stew and threatening to eat it all if she doesn't wake up. But as he reaches for her, his voice starts to crack and he begs her to say something. He completely loses it, breaking down in tears as he holds her. He just keeps begging her to wake up. Cradling her body on the floor next to the bed, he pleads with her to just give him some kind of answer, but the room stays silent. Back in the present, Lyle looks at Luzin with a lot of sympathy. He starts to put the pieces together, asking if this tragedy is the reason he built Lena. Luzin walks away, looking exhausted. He tells Lyle to go ahead and laugh at him for being a stubborn, arrogant guy who was so lonely he built a doll to replace his dead daughter. Lyle just stands there, totally shocked. He never would have guessed that the grumpy old repairer was carrying around that kind of pain. Lyle calls out to Luzin, telling him to hold on a second. He points out how angry Luzin seemed earlier and says there's no way he built Lena just to distract himself from being lonely. Luzin tries to brush it off, turning his back to Lyle. He says he's talked way too much already and it's time to wrap things up. As Luzin starts to tell him to head home, Lyle cuts him off. He looks at the old repairer with total focus and asks him to be honest. Luzin looks back over his shoulder, looking pretty annoyed that the kid won't let it go. He asks what Lyle is even talking about. Lyle doesn't back down and tells Luzin that he's going to take full responsibility for Lena's repairs. He promises to get her fixed as fast as humanly possible. He explains that to make it happen, he needs to see the original designs Luzin used to build her. He's sure that if he has that info, he can have her back to normal in no time. Luzin is clearly surprised by the intensity. Lyle drops into a deep bow, practically begging the old man for his help and the blueprints. Luzin lets out a little smirk and calls him a brat. He starts pouring himself a glass of wine, acting like Lyle just wants his trade secrets. He brags that he's the only one in the whole country skilled enough to create something like her anyway. His expression softens into something more exhausted. He admits he only reached out to Lyle because he was desperate, but even if he hands over the designs, it'll still take months to fix her. Luzin looks down, sounding pretty grim. He says that by the time Lena is actually repaired, he won't be around anymore. Lyle refuses to let Luzin walk away. He shouts the old man's name, telling him that ending things like this is just wrong. He tells him that if he chooses to just give up right now, nothing will ever get fixed. He looks Luzin right in the eye and gets blunt about it. He says that if Luzin gives up on the repair, then neither the old man nor his daughter will ever truly be saved. Lyle explains that after seeing how much Luzin cares for his daughter, he realized something important. He tells Luzin that there's no doubt Lena is his precious daughter. And because of that, a parent and child should be able to laugh together until the very end. Luzin is completely caught off guard by the kid's intensity. Lyle keeps pushing, saying that having regrets after someone is gone is way too late. He points out that since Luzin has already lost people close to him, he should be the one who understands that more than anyone. Luzin finally cracks. He tells Lyle he gets it and asks if he just needs to hand over the blueprints to get him to shut up. He mutters to himself that he thought Lyle was just some random kid, but he was wrong. The old man scratches his head, looking totally defeated as he grumbles about Lyle being even more stubborn than he is. Lyle just gives a small, confident smile. Moving on to the workshop, Lyle gets to work using the designs. Once he's finished, he checks in with Lena and asks her how she's feeling. Lena moves her arms around to test the joints and says everything is working perfectly. She looks at Lyle and tells him he really is an amazing repairer. Lyle doesn't let it go to his head though. He looks down at the papers and says it wasn't just his doing, giving all the credit to the quality of the original blueprints Luzin drew up. Lyle finishes up the work and notes that while the design was pretty complex, he managed to get through it once he figured out the logic behind it. He tells Lena that Luzin is seriously impressive and reminds her that he's her father. Lena looks down, taking that in for a second. She says that to her, the master really might be that kind of person after all. Lyle notices something is up and asks her what's wrong. Lena just looks at him and says his name quietly. She asks him if he has a moment to just listen to her for a bit. Lyle tells her he's all ears. Lena starts explaining that the master is actually a really kind person. She knows he can be clumsy, looks scary, and has a short fuse which makes people get the wrong idea about him, but she says he always treats her with so much care. She continues on, saying there's another side to it as well. She picks up a photo frame from the desk and admits she knows he treats her like a substitute for his real daughter. Lena looks at an old photo of Luzin and his family. She says she's fully aware of why he does what he does. She tells Lyle that's the reason why every time her body has some kind of error, Luzin goes all out to fix her. Lyle can only watch her as she explains this. In the next scene, a memory shows Luzin caring for his young daughter when she was sick. Lena says his dedication to repairing her is just like a parent desperately trying to help their child get over a cold. Lena clenches her dress, looking down as she struggles to find the words. She starts to say that she is something else entirely, but pauses before she can finish the thought. Sitting among the stacks of books in the workshop, Lena admits she has doubts. She asks Lyle if a person like her is even capable of supporting the master's heart the way a real daughter would. As the gears of her internal mechanisms churn, she points out the obvious reality of her existence. To her, she's really just a clockwork doll and nothing more. She continues, explaining that it doesn't matter how much she cares about losing. Since she's just a machine, she feels like she lacks the actual means to convey those feelings or truly connect with him on a human level. Lyle looks at her, completely struck by what she's saying. He realizes right then that there's no mistaking what's happening here. Lena gives a soft, sad smile while reiterating how kind the master actually is. While she talks, Lyle watches her and realizes that despite being a mechanical girl, she clearly has a soul and genuine emotions of her own. Lena looks up at him, sounding totally lost. She asks him what she's supposed to do about these feelings she can't express. Lyle just gives her a big, reassuring smile. He tells her it's going to be okay and calls her by name to get her to focus on him. Lena looks a bit surprised by his confidence. Lyle tells her that if she's serious about wanting to let the master know how she really feels, he has a plan. Meanwhile, out on the street, Luzin is looking like a total wreck. He's slumped over and leaning against a stone wall, looking so out of it that a passing woman stops to ask if he's even okay. Luzin stands alone, looking down and calling himself a complete idiot. He thinks back on his life and realizes he's always been clumsy at everything he tried, and his own stubbornness is the only reason he spent years just failing over and over. He remembers that despite how flawed he was, there was a woman who truly loved him. They were happy together and eventually, they were even blessed with a daughter who meant everything to them. Even though his wife and daughter are both gone now, the memory of their time together is permanently burned into his mind. He looks at an old family photo, holding on to the only pieces of them he has left. Luzin thinks about Lena and admits the harsh truth to himself. When he first built her, she was really just a tool meant to fill the massive, empty hole in his heart. As he walks down a lonely street, he calls himself a fool again. He realizes that somewhere along the line, he started feeling a genuine, deep affection for this clockwork girl who can't even smile or cry. He looks back on Lena's face and acknowledges that she really did become someone precious to him, moving beyond just being a replacement for what he lost. It hits him how much she's done for a guy like him. He knows he's rude, short-tempered, and pretty much worthless, yet she stayed by his side through all of it and never stopped calling him master. He clenches his fist in total frustration, calling himself a pathetic excuse for a man. He keeps repeating to himself that he knows exactly how badly he's messed things up. While pouring a drink, he admits he only acted like a jerk to Lyle because of his own ego and stubbornness. He tried to convince himself that Lyle just wanted to steal her secrets, and he let his pride tell him that he was the only one in the country good enough to build someone like her. The real fear comes out as he stands in the dark. He was terrified that if a better repairer showed up and actually fixed her, he'd be left behind, but he never actually stopped to think that she might want to leave him because of how he treated her. Luzin leans over a railing, looking down and calling his whole situation stupid. He reflects on what a mess his life has been, but he decides that for once, at the very end, he wants to do something right. He realizes that Lyle actually cares about Lena, and he just wants her to be able to live a normal, healthy life from here on out. Walking through the town, the weight of everything finally hits Luzin. He stops and covers his face, completely breaking down and sobbing in the middle of the street. Lyle and Lena are walking nearby when Luzin suddenly calls out her name. They both stop and turn around, looking totally caught off guard to see him there. Luzin is a wreck, crying into his hands before his legs give out and he collapses onto the pavement. Lena doesn't hesitate for a second. She rushes over to him and catches him, asking if he's okay. Lena looks down at him with a concerned, gentle expression. She asks him again if he's all right, her voice sounding softer than usual as Luzin stays hunched over, unable to stop crying. In a moment of pure clarity, Lena looks him in the eye and calls him father. It's the first time she's addressed him as anything other than her master. Luzin is absolutely stunned, staring up at her with wide, watery eyes. He can barely breathe, let alone speak, after hearing her say that. As he looks at Lena, a memory of his young daughter Lena flashes through his mind. The two images overlap perfectly, and the realization of how much Lena has come to mean to him makes him break down even harder. Luzin pulls Lena into a desperate, tight hug while still on his knees. He chokes out a thank you and says her name over and over, finally letting go of all his pride and anger. The most amazing thing happens next. Lena, the clockwork girl who was never supposed to have feelings, starts crying too. She holds him back tightly and softly tells him yes, finally showing the human heart Luzin thought was gone forever. At the shop, Asha carries a tea tray over to Lyle, looking pretty curious about what's going on. She asks him if he's finally going to fill her in on the details, but Lyle just looks back and asks her what's wrong. Lyle starts explaining the situation, mentioning how he ended up hiring a new employee so suddenly today. He admits it's a bit out of nowhere, but he feels like there wasn't much of a choice. He tells her that the new girl's previous employer had to close down their shop. Because of that, they gave her a glowing recommendation to come work for Lyle instead. Lyle remembers how intense Asha got when he first brought this up yesterday. She completely lost it, shouting about a new employee and demanding to know her work history, what skills she has, and if she even knows how to brew a decent cup of tea. Lyle tries to calm the situation down, noting that the girl has been around since the morning and seems to have made herself at home. He promises Asha that she's a good person and there's nothing to worry about, though Asha just responds with a doubtful look. Asha gets a bit of an attitude, specifically asking if he's talking about that woman. She seems pretty hung up on who exactly this new hire is. Lyle is totally confused and asks why she's suddenly in such a bad mood. Asha snaps back that she doesn't even know why she's mad, leaving Lyle realizing she's just lashing out for no real reason. Despite the tension, Lyle tries to stay positive. He tells Asha that even though things are a bit rocky now, he's sure the two of them will get along just fine once they get used to each other. Just then, the door opens and someone calls out an apology for the interruption. A voice announces that they are starting their new position today. Lena steps into the room wearing her maid outfit and a bright smile. She formally introduces herself and tells them she'll be assisting Lyle from now on, saying she looks forward to working with everyone. The scene shifts to the middle layer of a dungeon, where things are getting a lot more dangerous. Tinia is already on edge, gripping her weapon and looking around the rocky tunnels for any signs of trouble. As she moves through the cave, something stirs in the darkness behind some rocks. Before she can even react, a monster lunges out of the shadows. Tinia is caught completely off guard and lets out a scream as the creature closes in. Suddenly, Lindo steps in and handles the threat in an instant. She stands over the fallen monster, looking as calm as ever. She looks back at Tinia and tells her that it's never a good idea to let her guard down like that. Tinia is just relieved to be okay. She runs over to Lindo and thanks her for the save, clearly grateful that the high-ranking adventurer was there to bail her out. However, Tinia notices something is off. Lindo is staring into the distance with a look that's hard to read. Tinia stops and calls out to her, wondering if something is bothering her. Tinia gets a bit worried and asks if Lindo ended up getting hurt during the fight. She mentions that Lindo seems a lot less energetic than she usually is, and it's starting to show. Lindo immediately snaps out of it and turns back with a big, bright smile. She brushes it off right away, telling Tinia that it's absolutely nothing and there's no need to worry. She starts explaining that she has to head over to the Duke's place today. Tinia listens as Lindo mentions that Asha is apparently back to her usual self, making all sorts of unreasonable demands again. Lindo gives a bit of a tired smile, admitting that the whole situation with Asha is becoming a real headache for her. Moving on, Asha is seen looking pretty annoyed with her arms crossed. She's complaining about how Lindo has been talking about her, specifically the comment that she's still just getting started. Asha huffs and tells her listener not to pay any mind to that, insisting she's just in a growth phase. Asha is currently venting about how insensitive someone can be. She points out that while the guy might look like a gentleman on the surface, he has a habit of saying things that are way too blunt and really get under a person's skin. In the background, Lyle can only offer a nervous laugh as she keeps going. Lyle pauses for a moment, looking at Asha while holding one of his tools. He mentions that being able to interact with people like their family is actually a pretty great thing, and he asks her if she doesn't think that's a good way to be. The word family seems to strike a chord with Asha. She repeats it back to herself, looking thoughtful with her hand on her chin. Suddenly she realizes something and says that it actually reminds her of something she wanted to ask. Asha asks Lyle if his parents are staying in the royal capital right now. She explains that she really wants to go and properly introduce herself to them to give them her regards. Lyle stops his work immediately at the mention of his parents. He asks her if he hadn't actually talked about them yet, and Asha confirms that he hasn't said a word about them. She mentions that while she's heard plenty of stories about his grandfather, the topic of his parents has never really come up until now. Lyle sits there with his back to her, seemingly lost in thought over the question. Before the conversation can go any further, the shop bell rings. Both Lyle and Asha look toward the entrance, and Lyle quickly stands up to greet whoever just walked in. Tinia is the one at the door, looking a bit shy and hesitant as she steps inside and offers a quiet greeting. Lyle is a bit surprised to see her and asks if she's really here all by herself today. He mentions that it's pretty rare for her to come in alone with a repair request and asks where Lindo is. Tina looks down at the floor, looking pretty troubled and unable to speak right away. Lyle and Asha both watch her closely, sensing that something is wrong, and Lyle asks her directly if something happened. Tina starts opening up about Lindo, and Lyle immediately picks up on the vibe, asking if Lindo has been acting strange lately. Asha finds it hard to believe since Lindo seemed perfectly fine when they met just yesterday, but Tina just looks down at the floor, clearly troubled. Tina explains that at first she thought she was just overthinking things, but lately, Lindo seems low on energy and looks like her mind is miles away, constantly stuck deep in her own thoughts. Lyle admits that it sounds pretty worrying. Tina goes on to say that she actually reached out to one of Lindo's other party members to see if they knew what was going on. According to the party member, Lindo's weird behavior might have something to do with a person named Siesta. Both Lyle and Asha are completely confused by the name and ask who this Siesta person is. Tina looks pretty somber as she gets ready to explain the connection. Lyle and Asha just stare blankly as Tina drops the news that Siesta is actually Lindo's fiancé. The news hits them like a ton of bricks. Both of them jump up from their seats, losing their minds and shouting in total disbelief at the idea of Lindo having a fiancé. Lyle is blown away that even Asha was in the dark about this. Asha points out that she's known Lindo for quite a while, but the topic of her being engaged has literally never come up. Tina notes that even Asha didn't know, while Lyle is still too shocked to even speak. Tina starts wondering if something happened to Siesta that's making Lindo act so differently. Tina tells them that she actually tried asking Lindo's other associates about what was going on, but everyone she spoke to had such dark, grim expressions on their faces. It was clear something was wrong, but they wouldn't give her any more information than that. Lyle listens carefully as Tina looks toward him, hoping for some insight. He admits that hearing about everyone's strange reactions only makes him more curious about what's actually happening behind the scenes. Tina clenches her hands tightly in her lap, clearly distressed as she talks about how much she cares. She explains that she's just really worried about Lindo right now, even though she knows it might seem like she's meddling or overstepping her boundaries as a lower-ranked person. She opens up about her past, explaining that Lindo took her in when she was just an orphan and raised her to become an adventurer. Because of that, she feels a debt of gratitude that she can never truly repay, which is why she's so desperate to help. With a look of pure determination, Tina says she wants to do whatever it takes if there's even a small chance she can help Lindo. Seeing how much she's hurting, Lyle softly says her name to get her attention. Lyle tells her that he's on board too since he also feels like he owes Lindo a lot for everything she's done. Asha chimed in right after, saying that as Lindo's friend, there's no way she could just sit back and ignore the situation. Tina looks up at them, surprised and touched by their willingness to help her. Moving on, Lyle suggests that she should leave the whole matter to him and Asha for now so they can look into it. Later, Lyle and Asha are walking through a high-end district of the city. Lyle is completely blown away by the neighborhood, commenting on how every single house they pass is absolutely massive. As they walk, Asha turns to Lyle and asks him what his take is on everything they've learned so far. Lyle isn't quite sure what she's getting at, so Asha clarifies that she's talking about the news regarding Lindo. Asha points out that while she and Lindo have been friends for a long time, she still feels like she's missing something. She asks Lyle if Lindo ever mentioned anything to him in the past that might explain what's going on now. As they walk, Asha talks about her history with Lindo. She explains that they became close back when Lindo's party first reached the top ranks because Lindo did protection jobs for her mother. Asha says she always looked up to Lindo like a big brother, which is why she's so confused that she never heard anything about a fiancé. Asha starts feeling guilty, thinking that Lindo might have been dealing with all this stress when they saw each other yesterday without her even noticing. Lyle sees how much she's beating herself up and says her name to try and comfort her. Lyle tells her that if Lindo didn't say anything, it's probably because she cares about Asha and didn't want to dump her problems on her. Asha realizes he's probably right as they reach their destination, a massive, expensive-looking estate. They get to the door and are met by an elderly maid who seems very familiar with Asha. The maid tells Asha it's been a long time and remarks on how healthy she looks. Asha is polite back, saying it's been a while and checking in on the woman's mistress. The maid lets them know that Lindo isn't actually home right now. She apologizes for the bad timing and mentions that she has to step away for a second herself. The maid invites them to wait inside instead of standing at the door. She makes it clear that anyone coming with Asha is more than welcome and starts leading them into the house. As they enter a room, the sound of a creaking wheelchair fills the space. A woman's voice calls out, asking if they have a guest visiting. The maid turns to the woman and confirms they have visitors, calling her Siesta. In the background, Lyle looks surprised to hear that name. Lyle is completely thrown off by the name the maid just used. He repeats the name Siesta in his head, clearly recognizing it from the rumors they heard earlier. The woman in the wheelchair is revealed to be a calm, dark-haired lady. She apologizes for not meeting them at the entrance and introduces herself as Siesta Brunner, explaining that she's currently living there while being cared for. Lyle is visibly shaken as he looks at the woman in front of him. He realizes she's the Siesta mentioned in the rumors. Lyle tries to find his words but stays quiet, so Siesta takes the lead and apologizes for catching them off guard. The three of them settle into the living room to talk over tea. Asha immediately feels bad and apologizes for barging in without an invitation. Siesta just waves it off, telling them not to feel awkward about her being in a wheelchair. She mentions that she's lived like this for 5 years now. She gives them a gentle smile and says she has long since gotten used to her situation. Siesta changes the subject and tells them that Lindo actually talks about the two of them all the time. She goes on to say that Lindo feels like he owes them a lot for all their help over the years. She turns to Lyle and asks if he's the famous, super talented repairer she's heard so much about. Lyle gets a bit bashful and tries to downplay it, saying he only manages to work because Lindo helps him out so much. Siesta doesn't buy it and tells him there's no need to be that humble. The conversation shifts as Siesta points out that they clearly didn't have a scheduled meeting with Lindo today. Asha decides to be honest about why they're there. She explains that she heard some talk about Lindo acting weird lately and got concerned. Asha says she really wanted to help her friend out if something was wrong. She admits she was so worried that she just rushed over here without even making an appointment. Siesta looks down with a sad expression, admitting that she was right about what's been happening. She says it's painful to realize that even though they've been together for so many years, she didn't even notice the changes in Lindo. She continues, looking away as she tells Lyle and Asha that Lindo's current state is probably all her fault. Asha looks surprised by the confession and asks her why she would think something like that is her responsibility. Siesta begins to explain their history, mentioning that she and Lindo used to be in the same adventuring party. Back then, Lindo was just starting to get famous, and she really admired his skill and drive. Joining that party with him was the start of everything for her. As they sit over tea, she reminisces about how they started as rivals on the front lines, constantly clashing with each other. Over time, that rivalry turned into respect, and eventually her feelings grew into something much deeper. In a flashback to 5 years ago, a younger, healthy Siesta is seen looking full of energy as she calls out to Lindo. Lindo is seen talking to her about their progress, explaining that if they can just finish the quest they have scheduled for the next day, they'll finally reach their dream of becoming an SSS-rank party. He tells her it's been a long journey to get this far, but he knows they only made it because of her help. Lindo gives her a gentle, appreciative smile that catches her by surprise. Siesta turns bright red, feeling completely flustered by the praise, but the moment is suddenly interrupted by someone shouting at them from across the room. It turns out to be one of their teammates, a guy who starts laughing and teasing them for being so open with their affection again. The teammate keeps the jokes going, saying the two of them should just go ahead and get married already. Siesta loses her cool and tells him to shut up, but he just keeps laughing while she gets more and more annoyed. Lindo hangs out with a drink, telling his teammates to give the flirting a rest since they're still in the middle of a quest. Siesta shouts back from off-screen, insisting that she isn't doing anything like that. Later that night, Lindo and Siesta meet up outside. Lindo apologizes for calling her out at such a late hour, but Siesta tells him not to worry about it. Siesta asks if he wanted to talk about the strategy for the next day's mission. While they stand there, she thinks about how it has officially been 2 years since the day they first met. Lindo looks at her and says he truly believes he was only able to grow this much as an adventurer and as a man because he met her. Siesta is confused by the sudden change in mood and asks him what's going on. Lindo apologizes, calling himself a complete coward. He continues his confession, explaining that whenever he is standing in front of the woman he loves, he loses his edge and becomes incredibly indecisive. Lindo admits that he's probably just scared of the possibility that he might lose her one day. Siesta is stunned, asking him what he means by that. Lindo looks up at her and repeats that he simply doesn't want to lose her. He tells Siesta that he wants her to stay by his side forever and promises to cherish her more than he ever has before. As he asks for the chance to protect her for the rest of their lives, he pulls out an engagement ring. Holding her hand while down on one knee, Lindo vows to stay with her until the very end of his life. Lindo stays down on one knee, looking up at Siesta while holding her hand and asking her to give him an answer. Siesta is quiet for a second, her face turning bright red as she clutches her hands over her heart. She finally manages to whisper a yes. Overwhelmed with joy, Siesta starts crying while smiling, telling him that of course she wants to stay with him. Flash forward to a quest, and Lindo is shouting at Siesta to stop charging so far ahead of everyone else. Siesta, focused on the fight, just yells back that she's got it under control. As she moves, the ring on her finger catches the light, She looks back toward her team, thinking about the fact that she's actually going to be Lindo's fiancé. She tells herself that since today is such a big day for the party, she has to make this quest a success no matter what so she can be happy with Lindo. Just then, a pair of massive dark claws suddenly swipe down toward her. Everything goes dark as the memory shatters, and the scene shifts to the quiet interior of a bedroom. Siesta wakes up in a bed, feeling confused about where she is. The memories of the dungeon and the monster attack come rushing back, and as she tries to move, she realizes her left arm is heavily bandaged and completely weak. Lindo is right there by the bed and looks relieved, telling her how glad he is that she finally woke up. Siesta can't help but feel like it's all a dream. Siesta wakes up and completely loses it when she realizes the extent of her injuries. She starts screaming, asking about her leg, her arm, and her hand, unable to understand why they're gone. Someone tries to tell her to stay calm, but she's in total shock. Lyle and Asha walk together, reflecting on the heavy story they just learned. Lyle finds himself at a loss for words, while Asha thinks about how she had no idea Lindo and Siesta went through something so traumatic. Back in the memory, Lindo could only hold Siesta while her engagement ring lay shattered on the floor. While they're lost in thought, a voice suddenly calls out to them. Lyle perks up, looking surprised to see who's there. It turns out to be Lindo himself. He stands there looking pretty drained as he notices the two of them standing around. Lindo realizes they both went to see Siesta. He mentions he heard from Tina that people were worried about him not being his usual self lately, which is why they ended up dropping by without letting him know first. Lindo feels like he's being put on the spot, and Lyle and Asha quickly apologize for digging into his personal business like this. Lindo looks away from them, standing by the park bench where Asha is sitting. He explains that he wasn't trying to be secretive, he just didn't want to make any of them worry about his situation. Lyle looks at him, confused, and asks what he means by that. Lindo reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small cloth. He opens it up to show them the broken pieces of the ring he had once given to Siesta as a promise of their future. He looks down, looking pretty rough, and calls himself pathetic. He admits to Lyle and Asha that even after all this time, he still hasn't been able to decide what he should do next. Lindo looks back on the day of the tragedy, admitting he failed to protect Siesta when it mattered most. The memory of the chaos still haunts him as he stands there. He confesses that he's been stuck in his own head, constantly wondering what he could possibly do for her. He hasn't been able to figure out what would actually be best for her future. And as a result, he's just been paralyzed and unable to make any real decisions. Lindo looks at Siesta, who is sitting by the window in her wheelchair. He feels guilty because he's just kept her by his side without any clear plan, leaving their relationship in a total state of limbo. He mentions that her birthday is coming up soon, but he feels too pathetic to follow through on anything. He even questions if he has any right to ask her to marry him again after everything that happened. Lyle listens to this and starts clenching his fist, clearly getting frustrated with what he's hearing. Lyle finally snaps and tells Lindo he's not acting like himself at all. He challenges him, asking if he's really thinking about Siesta's happiness or if he's just being selfish. Lyle tells him straight up that this whole hesitation is actually just Lindo's own ego getting in the way. Lyle catches himself and acknowledges that he's just an outsider. He knows it's probably rude to speak up like this, and he admits he's struggling to find the right words to explain his point. He tells Lindo to stop obsessing over things like atonement or his sense of responsibility. Lyle wants him to put all that aside for a moment and just answer one simple question. What is the main thing he actually wants to tell Siesta? Lindo is completely caught off guard. He just stands there looking stunned, unable to find an answer. Asha watches them from behind and sighs, remarking on how indecisive men can be when it comes to stuff like this. She turns around and looks at Lindo with a serious expression. She reminds him that they're his friends, and tells him that these are the exact situations where he should be leaning on them for help, instead of trying to handle it all alone. Lyle looks a bit surprised as Asha speaks up, clearly having something specific on her mind regarding the situation. Asha gestures toward Lyle and asks if the person they need isn't standing right there. She confidently tells everyone that the world's best repairer is right in front of them. Later, they meet with Luzin, who acknowledges the request. He repeats the terms back to them, noting that they're looking for someone who can handle prosthetic arms and legs. Lyle gets straight to the point and says he wants Luzin to teach him how to craft prosthetics with parts that can move freely. He admits that while fixing something like a ring is simple enough, this is on a completely different level. The weight of the task brings back the memory of the accident where Siesta lost so much. The focus shifts to the reality of the limbs she lost and the pain she went through when it happened. Luzin grumbles about the shop being closed and how they just barged in, but Lyle is quick to apologize for the late-night interruption. Lyle explains his reasoning for coming here, telling Luzin that for a job this specialized, he's the only person he could possibly rely on. They sit together in the workshop as Lyle makes his case. Luzin stares at Lyle for a second before cutting through the small talk. He asks Lyle if his real motivation here is simply that he wants to save that girl. Without any hesitation, Lyle looks him in the eye and gives a firm yes. Luzin tells him he doesn't really have a reason to say no to the request. He trails off though, suggesting there might be a catch to his help. Luzin points out that the physical repair isn't the only hurdle here. Looking at a photo of a happy girl, he explains that the most difficult part is dealing with how the person actually feels. As they sit in the quiet living room, Luzin tells Lyle that even when people have a deep wish in their hearts, they usually can't bring themselves to be honest about it. He notes that it's just how humans are built. Luzin looks down, clearly remembering his own past mistakes. He says he's felt the weight of that truth personally. Lyle listens as Luzin jokes that he's too twisted to count, but explains that kind people suffer the most. He tells Lyle that before anything else, he has to find a way to ease that mental suffering. Lyle looks over his paperwork in silence, unable to stop thinking about Luzin's advice to solve the inner pain first. Later on, Lyle talks to Asha about the project. He says they should at least let everyone know that the arrangements for the prosthetic limbs are finally ready, but he seems a bit hesitant. Asha looks at the stacks of research on the desk and asks if he's still thinking about what Luzin said. Lyle quietly admits that he is. Lyle gets honest and says that while he acted confident before, he realizes this problem is rooted deep in Lindo and Siesta's hearts. He knows that fixing a physical form doesn't mean their hearts will just return to normal. He puts a hand to his chin, deep in thought. He starts questioning what he can even do to help the two of them beyond just his craft. Asha watches him for a moment, and then softly says his name to get his attention. Asha looks at Lyle with a gentle expression and tells him that being around him always makes her think of her mother. She thinks back to when she was younger and explains that because Lyle repaired her mother's dress, she was finally able to feel like her mother's daughter. It gave her the chance to be honest about her feelings, and now she can live in the present without any regrets. Looking at their current situation, she says she thinks she and Siesta might be going through the same kind of thing. Lyle stands tall and tells Asha to have more confidence in herself. He says he's sure that as long as they work together, they can definitely pull this off. He tells her she shouldn't try to carry the whole burden alone. He even tries to lighten the mood by joking that he actually knows more about how a woman's heart works than she does. Asha gets fired up and says they should head over to Lindo's place right away. Lyle follows her lead and agrees it's time to go. Later on, the two of them arrive at the estate. Lyle calls out a greeting at the gate, noting that Lindo was supposed to be home today. Just as they're walking in, they hear someone inside the house yell out Siesta's name. Lyle and Asha both look completely caught off guard. Lyle asks why anyone would be shouting like that so suddenly. They rush into the bedroom to find it in a bit of a mess. From across the room, a voice screams at them to just stay away and leave her alone. Inside, they find Lindo standing in front of Siesta, who is sitting in her wheelchair looking distressed. Lindo tells her straight out that there is no way he can just leave her by herself. Lyle and Asha run toward the middle of the room, and Lyle asks the both of them what happened to make things get this heated. Siesta is clearly at her breaking point, yelling at everyone to just stop. She tells them flat out that she has absolutely nothing left to say to any of them. Lyle and Asha stand by the door, completely stunned by the intensity of the situation. Lindo tries to keep things from spiraling and begs Siesta to please just calm down for a second. While the two of them are locked in their argument, Lyle looks over at Asha and says her name under his breath, wondering what they should do. Lindo looks completely drained as he explains the situation to Lyle. He says he was just trying to talk to Siesta about getting her ring repaired, but as soon as he mentioned it, she snapped and told him she was leaving the estate for good. Asha watches the tension in the room and then calls out to Lyle to get his attention. Asha steps in and apologizes for the intrusion, but then she asks Lindo if he wouldn't mind stepping outside the room with her for a moment. Siesta sits in her wheelchair nearby, looking completely defeated and covering her face. Lyle is taken aback by the request and calls out to Asha, but Lindo just looks at her, surprised that she's stepping in like this. Asha gives them a serious look and tells them to just leave everything here to her. She seems determined to handle the situation with Siesta one-on-one. Once they're alone, Siesta starts apologizing. She tells Asha she's sorry that they had to see her in such a pathetic, miserable state. Asha immediately shuts that down, telling her that isn't the case at all. Siesta clenches her fist in her lap and says she's done with everything. She explains that she truly believes that as long as she stays with Lindo, she's only going to end up making him unhappy. Asha looks at the scattered books on the side table and gently calls Siesta's name. She starts to open up, saying that she understands because she has also struggled with those kinds of feelings. Siesta looks down in her wheelchair and starts opening up about why she's pushing Lindo away. She explains that her body is broken to the point where she can't have children anymore. Since she knows how much Lindo loves kids, she feels like staying with him is just stealing that dream away from him. She clutches the fabric of her dress at her chest, looking completely pained. She says that she has been happy enough with the life she's had so far. Thinking back to her days as an active adventurer, she remembers the time they spent together in their party and eventually as lovers. To her, those memories are everything. A flashback shows the moment Lindo proposed to her, a time when she was still walking and full of life. She says she loves him more than anyone else in the entire world and wants him to keep being happy, even after her own time is up. Because of that love, she refuses to let herself become a burden that weighs down the rest of his life. Siesta starts to trail off, overcome with emotion. Just as she's about to finish her thought, Asha leans in and pulls her into a tight hug. Asha doesn't sugarcoat things and tells Siesta flat out that she's wrong. She points out that Siesta keeps saying she's doing all of this for Lindo's sake. While still holding her, Asha asks if Lindo's actual feelings were ever even a part of this choice. She looks Siesta in the eye and asks if this is really what she wants for herself. Siesta starts to shake, her hand trembling against her chest as she tries to find the words to respond, but she can't get past trying to say her own name. The floodgates finally break and Siesta starts sobbing. She admits through her tears that if Lindo isn't happy, then she can never be happy either. Asha gives her a gentle smile and tells her that if that's the case, then she doesn't need to hold back or hesitate anymore. Siesta is caught off guard, and then Asha mentions that her mother told her something important before she passed away. Asha starts telling a story about her parents. She mentions how her mother once asked her father if he was actually happy being married to someone who was always sick. After sharing that, she asks Siesta what she thinks her father's answer was. Asha holds Siesta's hands and explains her father's perspective. He told her mother that being able to walk through life by her side was the only thing he needed to feel satisfied. To him, just having her there made the entire world look like it was shining. As Siesta's eyes fill with tears, Asha continues the story. Her father believed that no matter what kind of hardships they ran into as a couple, there was nothing they couldn't get through as long as they were together. Asha looks at her friend and tells her she really needs to stop holding back. She encourages Siesta to finally just be honest about how she feels. Asha gives her a warm, supportive smile as she finishes her talk. Just then, Lindo's voice calls out to Siesta from right outside the room. The door opens to show Lindo and Lyle standing there. Lindo looks focused as someone inside the room acknowledges his arrival. Lindo walks over and drops to one knee in front of Siesta's wheelchair. He tells her very clearly that when it comes to his own happiness, there is only one thing that counts. He looks down, admitting he's sorry for making her wait so long and for taking her kindness for granted all this time. He tells her he is truly sorry for how things have been. Lindo looks up at her with total sincerity and says that his greatest happiness in life is being with her. Because that's the truth, he has something important to tell her. Still holding her hands while kneeling, Lindo declares that he wants to spend the rest of his life by her side. Lindo looks at Siesta with total focus and asks her if she'll live with him. They grip each other's hands tightly, and Siesta softly gives him her answer, saying yes. She's completely overwhelmed with emotion and tells him that of course she will. Watching the whole thing from a distance, Asha is actually the one who starts feeling nervous and ends up blushing. Asha teases Lyle for acting so stiff during the big moment, but she knows today is special. She points out that Lyle actually stayed up for several days straight just to make sure everything was perfect for this. Lyle realizes he's been caught, and Asha reminds him that even though he wanted to finish the job on time, he shouldn't be pushing himself to the point of getting sick. Lyle gives her a warm smile and thanks her for everything. He tells Asha straight up that he never could have finished this request if she hadn't been there to help him. Just then, the doors open and Princess Fran pops in to tell everyone it's finally time to get the show on the road. As the ceremony starts and flower petals fall, Lyle joins the crowd in clapping. He thinks about how there will probably be plenty of tough times waiting for the couple in the future. But as he watches everyone celebrate together, he's sure that as long as they have each other, there's nothing they won't be able to get through. Lyle watches the couple and thinks that no matter how hard things get, they'll be able to keep moving forward. Lindo looks at Siesta with a kind smile and tells her it's time to go. He thinks to himself that as long as they stay together, they'll be fine. Siesta looks incredibly happy in her wedding dress, blushing as she agrees and calls out Lindo's name. Some time later, Lyle is back at his shop and it's busier than ever. He welcomes a new customer but has to apologize, explaining that he's got a huge backlog of requests and asks if they can wait a bit. The customer doesn't mind at all and says it's worth the wait since Lyle is known as the best in the capital. Lyle just laughs it off modestly while his staff calls out to him. Lena steps in and tells Lyle she'll take care of the customers at the front of the shop. She tells him he should just focus on getting back to his repair work. Lyle is really grateful for the help and tells Lena she's a lifesaver before heading back to his tools. Later that night, Lyle sits alone at his workbench, thinking about how a whole month has already passed since the wedding. His reputation has grown so much that he has way more customers now, making the days feel like they're just flying by. Even with all the success, Lyle looks at the spear he's working on and realizes he still has a long way to go to reach his goals. He knows he has to keep pushing himself to get even better. Just then, a man shows up at the door to get his attention. He stands there and asks if he's talking to Lyle. Lyle turns around at his workbench, looking pretty confused by the sudden interruption. He just manages to ask if the person needs something. The visitor is a young guy standing right in the doorway. He introduces himself as Korn and says he has a big favor to ask regarding his own future. Korn gets really intense, slamming a fist against his chest and shouting for Lyle to take him on as an apprentice. Lyle is completely caught off guard by the request. He just stares back, totally stunned by what he's hearing. After the initial shock wears off, Lyle realizes the guy is serious about the whole disciple thing. He asks Korn why he's so set on being his apprentice specifically. Korn looks him straight in the eye and says there is something out there he absolutely has to fix. Lyle doesn't really get the big deal and offers to just handle the repair for him like a normal customer. Korn immediately shuts that idea down, shouting that it's not good enough. His sudden energy actually makes Lyle jump a bit. Korn explains that if he isn't the one doing the work, the repair won't mean anything. He's practically begging at this point. Moving to the sitting area, they both sit down to talk. Korn bows his head low, asking one more time for Lyle to please make him his disciple. Lyle looks at the determined young man for a moment before his expression softens into a smile. He tells Korn that he understands and decides to give him a chance. Korn looks up, caught off guard by the quick approval. Sitting down in the office, Korn admits he's not sure how much of a help he can actually be. Lyle doesn't seem worried about that and asks if he's ready to start helping out with the work today. Later on, Asha watches through a doorway as Korn works away at a desk. She asks Lyle if that's the kid she's been hearing rumors about, and Lyle confirms that it is. Lindo tells Lyle that he should make sure Asha and the new guy get along well. Lyle agrees, saying he'll do his best, and notes that the new apprentice is definitely showing a lot of enthusiasm. Watching Korn work, Lyle points out how the kid is completely focused on the task at hand. He admits that Korn isn't exactly a natural with his hands, but he's been working with that same intensity since his first day. Lyle figures it won't be long before the kid masters all the basics. Asha turns to Lyle and asks if he's actually okay with how things turned out. Lyle is a bit confused by the question and just gives her a puzzled look. Asha clarifies what she means, saying that taking on an apprentice probably wasn't something Lyle ever planned or really wanted to do. Lyle smiles and admits she's right, but he explains that he felt a connection to Korn. He saw something in the kid that reminded him of himself. He goes on to say that beyond that, the kid is just incredibly serious about the work. As they watch Korn continue to study and practice at his desk, Lyle says that he really wants to believe in the kid's sincerity and drive. Asha walks over to where Korn is working and tries to be friendly. She suggests that he should probably wrap things up for a bit and join them for some tea, but the kid doesn't even look up from his desk. When he doesn't answer, Asha leans in closer to see what's going on. She asks if he's actually listening to her, but Korn stays completely silent, totally locked into whatever he's doing. Asha tries one more time, asking if he can even hear her. She starts to repeat his name, and that's when Korn finally snaps. He mutters that he can hear her just fine. Without even turning around to face her, Korn tells Asha that she's being way too noisy. The comment catches everyone off guard. While Asha is still standing there with a polite smile, Lyle is in the background absolutely losing it, unable to believe the kid just said that to her. Lyle is internally panicking over the apprentice's attitude. Korn doesn't stop there, though. He asks Asha who she even thinks she is and tells her to stop talking to him because he finds her incredibly annoying. Asha is left standing there in total shock. Korn lets out a frustrated sigh and tells her she's just getting in the way of his practice. He looks her right in the face and tells her to never speak to him again, period. That was the final straw for Asha. She starts shaking with rage and blows up, screaming about how the kid has absolutely no manners. Later on, Lyle is looking pretty drained while holding his ledger. He thinks to himself that he eventually managed to calm Asha down, but the whole situation was a total mess. Looking over at his new apprentice, Lyle can't help but feel worried. He thinks that if Korn keeps acting like this toward people, the road ahead is going to be a lot harder than they expected. Lyle decides to wrap things up for the day since it's getting late. Korn agrees, but as he starts to head out, Lyle stops him to mention that it would be great if he could try a little harder to get along with everyone in the shop. Lyle tries to give him some advice, explaining that being a good repairer isn't just about having technical skills. He tells the kid that really listening to the clients and the people around him is just as important. Korn isn't buying it at all. He looks Lyle right in the eye and asks if doing any of that social stuff is actually going to make him better at his job. Lyle is completely stunned by the blunt response. Korn doubles down, asking flat out if being friendly with Lyle and the others is somehow going to improve his repair techniques. He tells Lyle that he has no use for anything unrelated to his craft because his only goal is to get better as quickly as possible. Lyle can only watch in silence as his new apprentice walks away. As Korn leaves, Lyle is left wondering why the kid feels like he's in such a desperate rush to master everything right now. Later on, Lyle is out in the city trying to follow a map. He looks completely stressed out and has no idea where he's going. He finally reaches the spot on the map, but it turns out to be nothing but a fenced-off empty lot. Lyle loses it, shouting that there isn't even a house standing there. Lyle remembers asking Korn for his home address before agreeing to take him in, but looking at the weeds in the empty field, he realizes the kid gave him completely fake information. Lyle lets out a frustrated sigh. He knows he can't get to the bottom of whatever is going on with the kid until he actually tracks down where he's really staying. 3 hours pass and Lyle is still out there, completely wiped out from the search. He decides to call it a day and thinks about just talking to Korn directly the next morning. Just as he's about to head home, he hears something that stops him in his tracks. He's totally confused and wonders why things are getting so complicated. He hears some shouting coming from a nearby house. Someone is yelling at someone else to knock it off and just listen for a second, which catches him off guard. Lyle peeks over a hedge to see what the noise is about and spots Korn. He's surprised to find the kid there of all places. He sees Korn pleading with a woman, calling her mom and asking for just a bit of her time. Lyle realizes he's just stumbled onto Korn's mother. The woman isn't having any of it though. She snaps at Korn, saying she's already told him a million times she refuses to see that person ever again. She says that just looking at his face brings back too many bad memories. Korn looks pretty desperate. He tells her he knows she's right, but he still tries to push back and make his point. He begs her to give his dad just one more chance and talk to him, but she cuts him off immediately and tells him to just get out and go home. She turns her back on him, looking completely cold. She makes it very clear that there is absolutely no way she is ever going to meet with the guy. Korn stands there looking crushed. He can't even find the words to argue anymore and just quietly calls out to his mom as he realizes he's not getting through to her. Korn loses it and shouts as he sprints away from the house. Lyle is still hiding in the bushes and watches the kid bolt, reacting with a quick start. Lyle feels a bit bad about poking his nose into Korn's private family business, but he decides he's already seen too much to just walk away now. He knows he has to see this through. Lyle walks up to the house and realizes this is where Korn must live. A man with a goatee comes to the door and greets Lyle, asking who he is. He sees Lyle's young face and asks if he's one of Korn's friends. Lyle starts to stumble over his words trying to explain himself, but he's interrupted when Korn suddenly appears behind the man. Korn is shocked and demands to know what Lyle is doing there. Korn starts pointing fingers and yelling, asking how Lyle even found this place and what he's after. He tells Lyle to just go home already. The man tries to step in and tells Korn to knock it off, saying he shouldn't be so rude to a guest. Korn looks completely fed up. He shoots a sharp look at the man and tells him to just stay quiet and out of his business. Without another word, Korn turns around and runs off again. Lyle and the man are left standing at the door, just watching the kid disappear. Lyle decides to be formal and bows deeply to the man. He apologizes for just dropping by out of nowhere and introduces himself as Lyle Disguise. Lyle explains that he's a repairer and mentions that he's been teaching Korn the trade lately. The man just gives a quiet nod as he listens to Lyle's explanation. The man introduces himself as Alphonse and lets Lyle know that he's actually Korn's father. Lyle puts the pieces together and realizes why the interaction he saw earlier was so tense. Alphonse just looks at the ground and says he understands now. Alphonse mentions he'd been wondering what Korn was getting into lately, and seeing Lyle makes it all click for him. He gives Lyle a deep bow, saying he's really sorry for all the trouble his son must be causing. Alphonse points out that Korn is incredibly stubborn once he makes up his mind, so he figures Lyle has probably been having a rough time with the kid. Lyle starts to say something but can't quite find the words. Alphonse lets out a little laugh and tells Lyle he doesn't need to be so stiff around him. He says that even with everything going on, he's still the kid's dad. Lyle can't help but think back to how upset Korn looked just a few minutes ago. Alphonse suggests they shouldn't just stand around in the doorway and asks if Lyle has some time to go talk at a park nearby. Moving on, the two of them sit down on a bench and Alphonse gets real. He admits it's pretty shameful, but explains that he and his ex-wife, Aine, got a divorce because of his drinking and his temper. He tells Lyle that it's not an excuse, but he'd lost his job after a massive mistake at work. After that, he just gave up, started drinking way too much, and his whole life just fell apart. Alphonse makes one thing very clear right off the bat. Korn had absolutely nothing to do with why he and Aine got divorced. He admits that since he was such a mess of a father, the kid had to deal with the trauma of seeing his parents fight with each other nearly every single day when he was small. He looks totally defeated with his head in his hands, saying that no matter how much time passes, he can't stop feeling terrible about everything that went down. Lyle listens to the story but doesn't quite see the link yet, so he asks how all that old family drama relates to what Korn is doing lately. Alphonse starts to explain his theory, telling Lyle that based on what he knows, he has a pretty good idea of what's going on in the kid's head. As they sit together on the park bench, Alphonse goes back to the topic of the divorce between him and his ex-wife. He drops a bombshell on Lyle, saying that Korn actually believes the entire divorce was his own fault. He repeats it just to make sure it sinks in. The kid is walking around carrying the guilt of thinking he's the reason his parents couldn't stay together. Lyle is completely stunned by the news and can't even wrap his head around why the kid would think something like that. To explain how things got so bad, Alphonse starts talking about his past, revealing that he actually used to have a prestigious job at the royal castle. He explains that it was a constant struggle because he was just a commoner, but he worked his tail off anyway. Alphonse thinks back to the time when he actually had things in his life he wanted to protect. Back then, things were good, and his wife Aine was happy as she held their young son, Korn. He explains to Lyle that he used to be incredibly serious about his career. He was working hard at the castle and was on a fast track to moving up the ranks, but being a commoner in a high-up position wasn't easy. He mentions that because he didn't have a noble title, there were plenty of people at the castle who were jealous and waiting for him to fail. It didn't take much to bring him down. He says that because of one tiny mistake, his enemies jumped on the chance and he was kicked out of his job almost instantly. That was the moment everything started falling apart. He ended up on the floor picking up papers, and eventually he just gave up and started drinking. His wife tried to get him to stop, telling him to get his act together, but he just kept chugging from the bottle. The house was full of tension. Alphonse completely lost it, smashing a bottle on the floor and screaming at Aine to shut up, claiming she didn't understand anything he was going through. Aine was heartbroken and scared. She begged him to tell her what was wrong, reminding him that they were a family and that he should be able to talk to her about his problems. Alphonse wouldn't listen to any of it. He just stood there in a room littered with empty bottles, telling her to be quiet and leave him alone. While the parents were busy screaming at each other, little Korn was watching the whole thing from the hallway. He saw the silhouettes of his parents fighting and stayed hidden, taking in the toxic atmosphere. Moving on, the young boy notices something left out in the room. He looks down, finding a specific item while his parents continue their conflict in the background. Young Korn finds a box and opens it to find a silver pocket watch inside. He's totally mesmerized by it, thinking it's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. He picks it up by the chain to get a better look, but since he's standing on a chair to reach it, he loses his balance. He lets out a gasp as the chair starts to tip. Just then, Alphonse appears in the doorway and says Korn's name. He looks completely drained and dark, staring at his son who's caught red-handed playing with the watch. Alphonse demands to know what he's doing. Korn starts shaking and tries to apologize, but Alphonse loses it and screams at him. He grabs the boy roughly, making him yelp in fear. Alphonse glares down at the kid with a look of pure rage, his face sweaty and distorted. Korn is terrified and breaks down, starting to cry as he realizes how much trouble he's in. Korn starts wailing at the top of his lungs. Aine hears the commotion and rushes into the room, calling out for her son as she sees the scene. In the middle of the chaos, the silver watch ends up on the floor. It's completely trashed, with the glass shattered and the internal parts exposed on the wood. Back in the present, Lyle sits with Alphonse and says he finally gets the whole story. Alphonse looks down, explaining that the watch was a precious memento involving his wife. Alphonse admits it's a bit embarrassing, but it was actually the gift he gave her when they got engaged. Lyle asks for clarification about the engagement, and Alphonse laughs it off, saying he used some really cheesy lines back then. He remembers the moment he gave it to her. Holding her hands, he told her that he wanted them to spend a lifetime of happy moments together, just like the watch keeps ticking away the time. Alphonse clutches his chest, looking completely beat down by his own past. He admits to himself and Lyle that he was a total fool back then. Sitting on the bench with his head hanging low, Alphonse says he should have just leaned on his family instead of acting out. He can't stop wondering why he did what he did, and he tells Lyle that no matter how much he regrets it every single day, it's a feeling he can't ever shake off. Lyle looks at the image of the shattered silver pocket watch and asks if that's the specific item Korn is so desperate to fix. Alphonse confirms it, saying that's definitely the silver watch they're talking about. Lyle goes quiet as he realizes what's really going on in Korn's head. He figures out that Korn thinks he's the reason his family fell apart and is carrying all that guilt. Because of that, the kid is convinced that he has to be the one to repair the watch with his own two hands, or else the fix won't actually count for anything. It all starts clicking for Lyle. He realizes the only reason Korn is being so stubborn about learning repair techniques is for something much bigger than just a hobby. Lyle looks off into the distance, putting the pieces together. He figures that Korn's real goal isn't just fixing a watch, but actually trying to bring his family back together and restore the bond they lost. The scene shifts to a memory of young Korn sitting alone in the grass. He's curled up next to a tombstone, looking small and completely heartbroken as he cries by himself. Back in the present, Lyle is stuck in his own head until Alphonse suddenly calls out his name, snapping him out of it. Alphonse looks at him with concern and asks if he's doing all right because he's looking pretty pale. Lyle quickly tries to play it off, waving his hands around and apologizing while insisting that he's totally fine. As they sit there on the bench, Lyle gets serious again and asks Alphonse if he can tell him just one more thing. Alphonse looks over and asks what he wants to know. Lyle starts off by asking Alphonse what he really thinks about the whole mess with Korn and the watch. He trails off for a second, clearly trying to find the right words to address the complicated family situation. Later on, Lyle heads up to Korn's room and finds the kid sitting on his bed looking totally drained. Lyle asks what's up, but Korn just looks at him and asks why he's still hanging around. Lyle explains that he actually asked Alphonse to step aside for a bit because he wanted to talk to Korn one-on-one. He tells the kid that he really felt like they needed to have a private conversation without any parents around. As he gets closer, Lyle asks if it's okay for him to sit down next to him. Korn doesn't say anything at first, just giving him a serious look while he waits to hear what Lyle has to say. Korn eventually tells Lyle to just do whatever he wants, acting like he doesn't care. Lyle takes the invitation and says thanks as he gets settled. They both sit on the floor by the bed and Lyle gets straight to the point, admitting that he heard the full story about Korn's parents from Alphonse. Korn doesn't seem shocked and just gives a cold, short reply. Looking down at the floor, Korn says he already knows everything there is to know about why his family fell apart. He looks at the broken silver watch and explains that he's fully aware he isn't the direct reason his parents got a divorce. He knows they were fighting way before the watch ever got damaged, and he realizes that him breaking it wasn't the only thing that ruined their marriage. Korn admits that even before he broke the watch, he could tell their relationship was going downhill fast. He'd seen the signs for a long time and knew things were getting worse between them. But even though he knows he's not technically to blame, he tells Lyle that it still hurts just the same. Korn sits on the floor with his head down, finally letting his guard down. He tells Lyle that the situation is just too painful to deal with and starts to explain the why behind his feeling. Still sitting in the quiet room, Korn admits that his only real wish was for his family to just stay together. He says that was the only thing he ever actually wanted. Korn grips the bedsheets tight as he talks. He says that watching his family fall apart like this is easily the most painful thing he's ever had to go through. Lyle watches the kid closely and quietly says his name, clearly feeling for what he's going through. Korn looks up as Lyle starts to speak. Lyle tells him bluntly that time is something that absolutely never moves backward. Lyle keeps going, explaining that you can't change what's already happened, no matter how much you might want to. He says time just keeps flowing on, and unless you're some kind of god, there's no way for anyone to change that. Lyle gets up to leave and tells Korn he should stop by the shop again sometime. He shuts the door behind him, leaving Korn alone with his thoughts. Later on, back at the shop, Eliza tells Lyle that the way he handled things was actually pretty out of character for him. Lyle just shrugs it off and asks if she really thinks so. Eliza explains that because Lyle is such an unusually nice guy, she assumed he'd try to say something way more comforting or supportive to the kid. Lyle just stands there listening, looking a bit thoughtful. Lyle tells her he doesn't believe you always have to give people the exact answer they're looking for. Eliza looks at him, curious, and asks him to explain what he's getting at. Lyle looks down thoughtfully and says that as far as he's concerned, a repairer's job is strictly about fixing what's broken and nothing more. While repairs can sometimes help connect a person's memories, things are a lot more complicated when it comes to Korn's situation. Eliza asks if this is the problem of the heart he mentioned earlier, and Lyle quietly confirms that's exactly what it is. Lyle explains that this whole situation is basically pointless unless the kid decides to take a step forward on his own. He says the kid has to be the one to make a choice and act, and then he has to accept whatever result comes from it. Eliza looks a bit down as she listens and asks if taking that step is going to be a painful experience for him. Lyle admits there's definitely going to be plenty of suffering involved, and he even confesses that he doesn't actually know what the right answer is for the kid. As they stand together in the shop, Lyle says he just thinks that the pain is a necessary part of the kid being able to move on with his life. Back in the other room, Korn is looking pretty rough and starts to speak up. He stands up looking completely stressed out and asks what he's even supposed to do if he can't turn back time. Lyle tells him that he really only has one choice, which is to keep moving forward. He knows that facing painful memories is a massive struggle and that the past is set in stone, but he suggests there's still a path if the kid refuses to give up. Lyle looks down and says that the only thing left for the kid to do is work as hard as he can so he can change his future from this point on. Korn isn't backing down though. He grabs his shirt and tells Lyle to show him the way, asking for the actual method to make that change happen. Lyle gives a small, knowing smile and says he gets it. He calls out to Korn and tells him they're going to move forward together. Lyle thinks about how they really just have to keep struggling no matter what. He realizes there's no other option but to keep living in the present while they fight through the mess. He knows the only way through is to put in every single bit of effort possible into the work at hand. Korn gets to work at his desk, and Lyle thinks that you have to be completely sincere with the task right in front of you. He's convinced that's the only way to actually make a difference. Looking at a polished pocket watch, Lyle reflects that this focus is the only method to change tomorrow, even if it's just by a tiny amount. Later that night, Alphonse is sitting on a bench outside, looking pretty drained. He's wondering what's up with Korn and why he was suddenly asked to come out here for a talk. Just then, a woman walks up to him. She stops in her tracks and asks if it's really him sitting there. Alphonse looks up and is completely floored, calling out the name Aine. She stands there looking a bit unsure of herself as they finally face each other. Alphonse is sitting alone when Aine walks up and asks what he's doing out there. She looks at his tired face and asks if they can talk for a moment. The two sit down on a bench together. Aine asks if Korn is doing okay and Alphonse tells her he's fine. He explains that the kid found his own path and is currently working hard as a repair apprentice. Aine looks relieved and says she's really glad to hear that. Alphonse nods, agreeing that it's definitely a good thing. The mood gets heavy as Aine looks at Alphonse. She finally brings up the past and tells him she's sorry for everything that happened. She admits she saw how much he was struggling with work but only thought about herself. She regrets running away without thinking of him or Korn, and confesses she never even tried to listen to his side of things. Alphonse can't take it and shouts that she's wrong, insisting the fault is all his. He says he's the one who stayed silent and said terrible things to her, so she shouldn't be the one feeling guilty. Aine pushes back, shouting that it's not just about that. She's clearly upset as she admits she wasn't even considering Korn's well-being at the time. She yells that she abandoned them and dumped all the responsibility on his shoulders. Alphonse yells right back, arguing that the responsibility was his to carry alone. Crying now, Aine tells him she knows he's actually a kind person. She points out that he's still trying to hoard all the blame, which is exactly what caused their problems in the first place. Just then, Korn shows up and interrupts them. He says it's clear both his parents have been hurting for a long time, leaving Alphonse and Aine completely stunned by his sudden appearance. Korn stands before his parents and finally speaks up, calling out to both his dad and mom. He looks down, admitting that he's kept them waiting for a really long time to hear what he has to say. Alphonse and Aine look on in shock as Korn explains that he's been working as hard as he can. He tells them he understands that things between the three of them might never go back to exactly how they were in the past. Even so, Korn is determined to keep moving forward, even if it's just one small step at a time. He admits he's mostly just repeating the words of his master, Lyle, but the sentiment is his own. With tears streaming down his face, Korn looks his parents in the eye and tells them he just wants the two of them to find happiness from now on. He says that's all he's really praying for. There's a heavy silence in the air, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a pocket watch as the weight of his words sinks in. Alphonse is completely overcome with emotion and calls out his son's name while Aine breaks down in tears, overwhelmed by how much Korn has grown. Alphonse reaches out and grabs Korn's shoulders, finally closing the distance between them as a family. Later that night, Lyle is back at his workshop and looks out the window at the city. He catches a glimpse of the full moon and mentions to himself how beautiful it looks tonight. Inside the shop, Korn is face down on the table, completely exhausted from the day's work. Asha looks at the scene and jokes about how they seem to end up this tired every single day, and Lyle can't help but agree with her. As they settle down, Asha mentions that she actually has some news. She tells Lyle that she heard something interesting from Princess Fran earlier. Lyle looks up as Asha explains that the princess mentioned she might be sending another official request his way very soon. Asha drops some heavy news, confirming that the work she mentioned is actually a direct request from the king himself. Lyle is pretty overwhelmed by the scale of the job. He can't believe how casual Asha is being about it, especially since the last royal job involved an ancient scripture. He starts wondering what kind of legendary item he'll have to fix this time. Just then, the shop door opens and Lyle heads over to see who it is. He gives a polite greeting as a visitor arrives. Asha looks over and immediately recognizes the person walking through the door. It's a maid in a formal uniform who bows deeply. She tells Asha it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Asha introduces the woman to Lyle, explaining that her name is Anise and she's Princess Fran's personal maid. Anise stays polite and introduces herself formally to Lyle. Lyle greets her back and lets her know that he's the one running the shop. Anise apologizes for dropping in so late, acknowledging that they were probably just about to close up for the night. She gets straight to the point and holds out a formal scroll, explaining that she's been sent by the king to deliver an official request. Later on, Lyle finds himself at the palace. The king sits on his throne and apologizes to Lyle for the sudden summons, addressing him by his full name. Lyle gets down on one knee, feeling pretty humbled. He tells the king that there's no need to apologize and that it's actually a huge honor for him to be called to the palace. The king gets down to business, addressing Lyle by his title as a repairer. He tells him he has a small favor to ask, which catches Lyle off guard. He wasn't expecting the king to just call it an errand. Lyle's a bit confused. He was sure he'd be asked to fix some legendary artifact, but now he's wondering if the king just wants him to act as a delivery guy for some envelope. The king holds out a piece of paper and explains that it was originally addressed to a lord out on the border. He admits he's kept it hidden away for way too long, but now that he's getting older, he feels like he needs to do something about it. Lyle takes the paper and looks it over. It's in pretty rough shape, covered in stains and looking extremely fragile. Lyle asks if it's okay for him to take a closer look at the document. The king gives him the green light immediately. Lyle gives a polite "excuse me" as he starts his inspection. The paper is old and the writing is barely visible. Looking at the text, Lyle realizes it's definitely a letter, but the ink is so faded and blurred that he can't make out a single word. It's clear to him that this thing was written a lifetime ago and has seen much better days. The king looks a bit regretful about how much time has slipped by. He finally tells Lyle what he actually wants. He needs Lyle to use his repair skills to fix the damaged parts of the letter so it can finally be delivered to that lord. The king admits it's going to be a real pain of a job and asks Lyle if he's willing to take it on. Lyle accepts the king's request with a serious look. He tells the king that he understands the gravity of the task and promises to not only fix the damaged letter, but also make sure it gets delivered to its destination. Lyle meets up with his travel companions and gives a respectful bow. He notes that he'll be working with them for a while starting today and asks everyone to look after him during the trip. Lindo smiles and tells Lyle that the pleasure is all theirs. One of the younger members of the team, an energetic guy, pipes up and promises they'll provide a solid escort all the way to the border. Lyle tells Lindo how much he appreciates the help and says having a professional team around is a big relief. On the inside, he's actually a total wreck, sweating because this is the first time he's ever had to go on a business trip like this. Thinking back to a few days ago, Lyle was completely losing it when he found out the trip would take a full week of traveling through the wilderness just to reach the border. Asha was even more worried than he was, getting into a heated argument with Lyle's father. She asked what they were thinking letting him go alone and dismissed the idea that a small dagger was enough protection. She straight up told him his skills as a former adventurer were garbage and insisted on hiring Lindo's group. Lyle had originally planned to just handle the trip solo, but after Asha went off like that, he realized he didn't really have a choice in the matter. Lindo steps in to get the introductions started so they can get moving. Lindo introduces the first member of the team, a warrior named Jack. Jack seems like a pretty high-energy guy and gives a friendly greeting, ready to get on the road. Lyle tells Jack he's looking forward to working with him. Jack tells him not to worry about a thing and promises to handle any bandits that try to jump them at night. Next up is a girl named Riko. She keeps things short and professional, introducing herself as the magic user for the group. Lyle gives a deep bow and tells everyone he's really looking forward to working with them. Riko just looks at him with a cold, skeptical expression. Lyle immediately notices the vibe and starts sweating, feeling a bit awkward. Lindo laughs it off and pats Lyle on the shoulder, telling him not to take it personally because Riko is just easily misunderstood and is actually a good person. Lyle tries to play it cool and says it's totally fine. Lindo decides it's time to move and takes the first step forward. Lindo announces to the group that they are officially heading to Gardes to fulfill the king's request. The journey to Gardes is no joke, taking over a week just to get there. The group sets up camp in the woods to rest for the long trek ahead. They push through forests crawling with monsters, but luckily they manage to make it through without running into any major trouble. After traveling a long distance from the royal capital, they finally close in on their destination. The group stands before the massive stone gates of Gardes, finally completing the first leg of their trip. A guard at the gate looks them over and realizes they're messengers sent from the capital. Lindo notices his hesitation and asks if there's some kind of problem. The guard at the gate finally breaks his silence and tells the group there isn't any problem, giving them the okay to head inside. Lyle looks up at him, relieved but still a bit curious about the hesitation. As they walk through the gates, the guard just stands there holding his spear with a stony expression. Lyle can't help but feel a bit uneasy, wondering why the guy reacted so weirdly to them. Once they get past the gates, Lyle is immediately floored by the sight of a massive, grand building towering over the area. Lindo mentions it's her first time seeing it too, and she's already thinking about what a great story this will be for Siesta. Lyle starts geeking out over the architecture, pointing out how the unique design is perfectly balanced down to the millimeter. Seeing his excitement, Lindo smiles and says that for a guy like him, this place must feel like a dream come true. The mood shifts pretty quickly when Lyle notices some local women whispering to each other and laughing while watching them pass. It's clear they're being talked about, and not in a particularly friendly way. Lyle brings it up to Lindo, mentioning that it really doesn't feel like they're being welcomed with open arms here. He keeps thinking back to the guard's cold face at the gate. He wonders if people from the royal capital just don't visit this town very often, which might explain the cold shoulder. Rico points out that trade is usually pretty busy in this area, so seeing travelers shouldn't be that big of a deal. Jack adds his 2 cents, saying it's less about being unwelcome and more like the locals are walking on eggshells around them. Lyle is caught off guard by that description, questioning why everyone would be acting so cautious or sensitive about their presence. Lindo explains that the real issue is probably their title as official messengers from the king. She asks Lyle how much he actually knows about this mission, and Lyle admits he's still fuzzy on what the actual request is. Turns out the king had a specific mission for Lyle: repair a damaged letter and hand-deliver it to the local lord. Though the text was mostly ruined, it looked like it was originally written for a close family member. While they walk, Lindo drops a bombshell and tells Lyle that the lord of this territory is actually the king's younger brother. Lyle is pretty shocked to hear they're related. Lindo gets a bit more serious, looking down as she whispers to Lyle that she really shouldn't be talking about this so openly. She explains that back before the king took the throne, there was a massive power struggle for the crown. Since the two were half-brothers, everyone split into 2 factions to support them. The lord ended up losing the fight and was basically exiled from the royal capital. The story rings a bell for Lyle, and he mentions that he's actually heard some rumors about that history before. Lyle starts putting the pieces together, thinking back to the lord's grim face and realizing why the man looked so incredibly stressed out. Rico points out the awkwardness of the situation, saying they're messengers from an enemy to a lord who is actually respected by his people. Jack chimes in saying that no matter the drama, they still have a job to do, and Lindo agrees. Just then, Lyle notices Rico staring off into space with a distant look. He asks if she's doing okay, which seems to snap her back to reality. Rico quickly brushes it off, telling Lyle not to worry about her. She claims she was just taking in the local scenery. Lyle doesn't push it any further and just gives a simple nod, though he still looks a little unsure about her reaction. Lindo suggests that they should get moving and head over to the lord's estate to pay their respects and finish the job. Jack seems ready to go and follows along with a smile. Later on, things don't go according to plan at all. Just like Jack had predicted earlier, the group ends up getting chased away from the gates by the lord's staff. The guards at the gate tell the group that while they appreciate them coming all this way, Lord Noah isn't seeing anybody right now. Lyle is pretty shocked by the news and asks if the lord is sick, trying to emphasize that they're there on official business for the king. One of the guards looks pretty somber as he apologizes. He explains that the reason for the isolation is that Lord Noah is carrying a really deep emotional wound in his heart. The group stands there in disbelief as the guard doubles down. He tells them he's sorry, but he has to ask them to just go home. Back at their home base, Lyle is looking completely drained and lets out a massive sigh. He wonders what they're even supposed to do now, since he didn't think they'd get rejected so quickly. Lindo mentions that she didn't expect the rejection to be that blunt either. She admits that even she doesn't know the full story of what went down during the old struggle for the throne. Rico adds that the staff wouldn't even let them leave a message, and Lyle can only manage a weak reply as he slumps in his seat. The group sits in silence for a moment, wondering what could have caused the lord so much pain. They realize the locals aren't going to be the ones to tell them the truth. Lindo points out that judging by how the lord's subordinates were acting, this is going to be a tough nut to crack. Lyle just sweats and agrees that the situation is looking pretty bleak. Lyle turns his attention to the damaged envelope on the table. He thinks the contents might actually hold the key to understanding the situation, but he knows that first, he has to find a way to repair it. Lindo tells the group that they shouldn't get in the way of Lyle's work. She suggests that everyone should head back to their own rooms and get some rest for the night. Jack agrees with the plan, and Rico says she understands before saying goodnight to everyone. While Lyle is working alone, a mysterious boy appears in the shadows. He asks if Lyle is the one who came as a messenger from the king. Lyle is completely caught off guard by the sudden voice behind him and turns around in shock. A young boy dressed in a formal suit stands by the door. He gives a polite greeting and introduces himself. The boy says his name is Armin. He reveals that he is actually the son of Lord Noah, the ruler of the city. Lyle is stunned by the revelation, as he had no idea the Lord even had a son. Armin just laughs and asks if he's really that surprised to see him. Lyle is internally freaking out because he didn't even hear the kid walk into the room. He wonders why the Lord's son would suddenly show up to visit him in the middle of the night. Armin gets straight to the point and asks if Lyle is the one trying to deliver a letter to his father. Lyle confirms that he is indeed trying to deliver a message. Armin says he gets it, but warns Lyle that it's probably going to be a lot harder than he thinks. Lyle asks why meeting Lord Noah is such a big deal. Armin explains that his father has been dealing with a massive sense of loneliness and loss for a long time, and it's basically crushing him. Armin starts explaining the history of his family, going back to a few years before he was even born. He tells Lyle that his father, Noah, was caught in the middle of a brutal struggle for the throne. After losing the power struggle, Noah ended up in the frontier town of Gardys, totally isolated with no family to turn to for support. But things changed when he met Armin's mother. She became the most precious person in the world to him, giving him a reason to keep going in this new land. For a while, Noah was actually happy. He had finally found a sense of peace and a family of his own to cherish. Unfortunately, that happiness was short-lived. The sound of a crying newborn signaled a turning point that would change everything. An attendant delivered the heartbreaking news that while the baby had survived the birth, Noah's wife had passed away. Noah was left holding his son in total despair, asking why this was happening to him. He completely lost it, feeling like every single thing he ever cared about was just slipping through his fingers. Lyle can't believe what he's hearing. Armin explains that what's really destroying his father's heart isn't just the fact that he lost the war for the crown. The succession war was just the catalyst. Armin explains that the real damage goes much deeper than just losing a title or a throne. Because he lost the love of his life, Noah still lives his life believing he is completely alone. Lyle stands there in silence, finally realizing the depth of the Lord's trauma. Lyle turns the conversation toward Armin, asking the boy about his own feelings on the situation. Armin looks down at the bed, sounding a bit surprised that the focus is on him. Lyle tells Armin that Lord Noah isn't actually alone because he has his son. He points out that the only reason Armin even came to see a repairer like him was because he cares so much about his father. Lyle tries to explain that as long as Armin is around, things should be okay. Suddenly, Armin lets out a loud shout and jumps up from the bed. Before Lyle can finish his thought, the boy starts sprinting toward the door. As he makes his escape, Armin yells back that he just remembered he has something really important to take care of. Lyle is left standing in the room, totally caught off guard by the sudden exit. As Armin walks through the hallway alone, he looks dejected. He tells himself that he's just no good. Lyle snaps out of his shock and chases after the boy, calling out for Armin to wait up. Lyle stops in the doorway, wondering why Armin would say such a thing about himself. He can't wrap his head around why Noah still feels so isolated when he has a son who cares this much. Just then, a voice from the shadows nearby catches Lyle's attention. He turns around quickly, surprised to see someone else is there. It turns out to be Rico standing in the hallway. Lyle is surprised to see her and asks what she's doing there. Rico holds out a small object, explaining that the boy who just ran past must have dropped it on his way out. Lyle takes the envelope from Rico and looks at it closely. He notices something is off right away and wonders what he's looking at, seeing how battered the paper is. Rico explains that the boy who just sprinted past must have dropped it on his way out. Lyle looks down at the item, realizing it belongs to Armin. Lyle examines the letter and sees it's in rough shape. The names of the sender and the recipient are almost completely blurred out. He notices some specific marks on the paper and realizes they aren't just random spills, but actually water stains from someone crying. Despite the damage, he can just barely make out the writing. It's a letter from Armin, addressed simply to his father. Later, Lyle sits at his desk, deep in thought. He's struggling to make sense of everything involving Lord Noah and Armin. The boy's behavior has been so strange that Lyle even finds himself questioning if Armin is actually the Lord's son. He looks at the two letters sitting on the desk in front of him. He's torn on what to do next with them. Lyle thinks about Armin and the king, realizing that both of them just want to get a message through to Noah. They both care about him, and Lyle feels like he needs to do something to help the Lord get out of the dark place he's in. He makes up his mind and decides that as a repairer, he has to fix both of these letters. Lyle puts on his working mask and gets to work. After a while, he finishes the delicate process and mentions that he just needs to wait for the ink to dry now. As he sits back and looks at his handiwork, he can finally see the full message. The actual content of the letter catches him off guard. Lyle finishes the restoration and looks at the letter, hoping he can be trusted to handle something so personal. He thinks about Armin and the weight of the words on the page. Lyle tries to get past the guards at the estate, but they're not budging. They tell him again that no messengers from the king are allowed to see the Lord. Lyle tries a different angle, asking if they can at least take the item he brought and deliver it, but they just apologize and stand their ground. The guards even bow to him, explaining that they just don't want the Lord to have to deal with any more pain or hardship. They're basically begging Lyle to drop it and leave the Lord alone. Lyle looks pretty stressed out by the situation, but he realizes he can't get in through the front. He gives a quiet nod and agrees to back off for now. As Lyle walks away holding the letters, he's racking his brain for a way to get them to Lord Noah. Just then he hears something in the bushes, and Armin suddenly pops out telling Lyle to follow him. Lyle is caught totally off guard and can't believe Armin is actually there. Armin leads him deep into the woods on a path that's barely even a trail. As they're trekking through the trees, Armin mentions that this is a secret shortcut that nobody else knows about. They finally reach the end of the path, and Armin tells him they're about to come out into the estate's private garden. Lyle pushes through the bushes and is completely stunned by what he sees. In the middle of the beautiful garden, there's a figure with long hair sitting quietly in a chair with their back to them. Armin looks back at Lyle one last time and tells him that he's leaving the rest up to him. As Lyle walks through the quiet garden, a voice calls out his name. He stops and turns toward the sound. Lyle looks a bit surprised to see the figure in the chair and asks if he is indeed Lord Noah. The man stands up slowly, leaning on his chair. He confirms that he is the person Lyle is looking for. Lyle immediately drops to one knee and apologizes for showing up without any prior permission or an invitation. Lord Noah looks down at him and asks who he is. Lyle introduces himself as a repairer and explains that he was sent by the king to deliver a personal letter. Lord Noah's expression softens slightly at the mention of the king. He asks if the letter is really from his older brother. Lyle confirms that it is. Looking at the Lord, Lyle can't help but feel like the man is completely hollow inside, as if he's been consumed by grief for years. Lyle senses the massive void in the man's heart and decides to speak up. He tells Lord Noah that he actually has a second letter to deliver as well. Lord Noah looks back at him, curious now. He calls Lyle by name and asks who the second letter is from. Lyle holds the second letter ready, hoping it might be enough to fill a bit of that hole in the Lord's heart and finally get a real reaction out of him. Lyle remains on one knee and hands over the second letter, telling Lord Noah that he really needs to see the contents for himself. Deep down, Lyle knows that the words inside this specific letter are exactly what the man needs to hear. Lord Noah stares at the envelope for a second before reaching out. He lets out a small hum as his fingers brush against the paper, finally taking it from Lyle. As soon as he reads the first few lines, Lord Noah's eyes go wide with total shock. He loses his calm and snaps, asking what kind of cruel joke this is supposed to be and demanding to know which of his people sent Lyle to pull a stunt like this. The man starts sweating, looking completely distressed. He can't wrap his head around it because his son, Armin, is supposed to be long gone. Lord Noah begins to sink into his memories of the estate. He thinks back to how his son was born with a really weak body, making his health a constant struggle from day one. Despite being sick, Armin was the best kid and never once complained about his life. Lord Noah loved him more than anything, seeing the boy as a precious treasure that his late wife had left behind for him to protect. He put everything he had into raising him with as much love as possible. In one of their quiet moments, a young Armin looked up at his dad with a big smile. He was curious and asked what his mom was actually like when she was around. Sharing those stories about his late wife with his son always made Lord Noah feel a sense of peace. It brought a genuine warmth to his heart that he didn't find anywhere else. The two of them spent so much time just sitting together like that. It wasn't anything flashy or special, just simple, quiet moments that felt incredibly kind and gentle. Back then, Lord Noah used to wish that things could stay like that forever. He honestly felt like that peaceful life was a reward for all the hard work and pain he'd dealt with in the past. But things didn't stay peaceful forever. In a dark memory, Lord Noah is seen desperately kneeling by his son's bedside, begging Armin to wake up. Noah's world was falling apart. He shouted through his tears that he didn't have anyone left but his son, terrified that if the boy died, he'd be completely alone. The pain of that moment is still raw. Back in the present, Noah bows his head and clutches his hair, his eyes still stinging from the memory of that loss. The atmosphere in the room back then was heavy with grief. While Noah stayed glued to the bedside, the maids stood by the windows crying, and the rest of the staff could only watch the tragedy unfold in silence. Lyle speaks up, telling Noah that he totally gets why this feels like a bad joke. But then he looks Noah in the eye and explains that he actually got this letter directly from the person involved. Lyle holds out the envelope and clarifies that Armin was the one who entrusted it to him. Noah is completely stunned, barely able to whisper that something like that should be impossible. Lyle doesn't back down and asks Lord Noah to please just read it once. He holds the paper out, and Noah finally starts to really look at the handwriting on the page. Noah turns his back to the others as he focuses on the letter. His eyes land on the first few words, which simply say, "To Father." The letter is heartbreaking. In it, Armin wrote that by the time his dad found these words, he'd probably be gone. He mentioned how there were still so many things he wanted to talk about tomorrow and the day after, even though he knew he wouldn't get the chance. A vision of the past shows a young Armin sitting at his desk, carefully writing those very lines. He wrote about how his father always lived for others, from the people in the town to his late mother, and finally for Armin himself. The letter continues with Armin's voice from the past. He wrote about how his father was always pushing himself for the sake of others, and it made him worry that the man was reaching his limit. He was terrified that eventually the pressure would become too much, and his father would end up getting deeply hurt. Armin wanted his father to know that if things ever got that bad, he shouldn't suffer alone. He explained that the people in the town were actually more grateful to him than he ever realized. Since they valued the Lord just as much as he valued them, Armin urged his father to finally believe in them and lean on them for support. As Armin reached the end of the letter, his hands started shaking. Tears hit the paper, smudging the ink as he wrote a final, simple goodbye to his father. With tears streaming down his face, the young boy finished his message by telling his father that he would love him forever. He signed the letter with his own name, completing the last task he had for the person he cared about most. Back in the present, Noah sits in the middle of a flower field, the weight of the letter finally sinking in. He stares at the pages with tears running down his face before pulling the letter tight against his chest, completely overwhelmed by his son's final words. Noah looks up at Lyle, the reality of the situation hitting him. He acknowledges that Lyle really was the one who delivered this message from his late son. He admits that the whole thing sounds completely impossible, but he isn't going to deny what's right in front of him. He knows his son's handwriting well enough to be certain that these words are real. Noah reflects on how much he cherished his son, but realizes now that Armin had grown up much more than he thought. It breaks his heart to realize that while Armin was the one dying and in pain, the boy spent his final moments worrying about his father's well-being. The realization finally clicks for Noah. He sees now that Armin's biggest wish was for his father to stop carrying everything alone and to start relying on the people who care about him. Lyle adds his own perspective, telling Noah that even as a stranger coming from the outside, it was obvious how much the townspeople cared about their lord. He points out that he saw exactly how hard Noah was trying to push everyone away despite all that love. The town is a beautiful place where everyone lives happily, and it turns out every bit of it was built by Lord Noah himself. After his son passed away and Noah fell into a deep depression, the local people wanted to do whatever they could to ease his burden, even if it was just a little. Lyle stays kneeling in front of the Lord, holding out a second piece of paper. He asks Noah if he'll take a look at a letter sent by the king himself. Lyle watches as the contents of the king's message are revealed. The letter starts by addressing the complicated history between the two brothers. In the letter, the king expresses his deep sadness over the succession struggle that forced them to fight against each other. He writes about his regret over how things turned out, noting that back then, they were trapped in a situation where they had no other choice. The king makes it clear that his feelings haven't changed over the years. He writes that he has always cherished Noah and will continue to do so from now on. Noah stares at the letter, looking completely drained. He asks if his older brother has really been living with that much regret since the day their conflict began. Noah admits the truth to Lyle, saying he doesn't actually hold any grudge over what happened. Lyle looks back at him, clearly surprised by the revelation. Lyle realizes that despite all the years of isolation, Noah hasn't been holding onto any hatred for the king. Noah looks out at the field of flowers and explains that they were just caught up in a political mess they couldn't control. In reality, he and his brother actually got along quite well. He explains that the succession war didn't change the brothers, but it changed everyone around them, especially their mothers. Since they were both young and had no real authority, they simply couldn't bring themselves to betray the mothers who had raised them with so much love. The king's letter continues, with him admitting that he should have been the one to reach out first and bridge the gap between them instead of letting the silence last so long. Noah reads on as the king mentions hearing the news about Armin passing away and knowing that Noah was left all alone. He explains that's exactly why he sent the repair request, ending the message by telling Noah that he will always be his precious brother. Noah looks up from the letter and thanks Lyle for his help. He decides that he wants to try believing in the people who are important to him again, just like his son always suggested. Lyle is clearly relieved and gives a cheerful response, happy to see that the brothers might finally be able to move past their history. A memory of Armin appears, showing the young boy walking through the beautiful flower field Noah built. He calls out to his father, asking for his attention. In the vision, Armin kneels at his father's feet and takes his hands. He looks up at Noah and tells him that being his son made him truly happy. Noah pulls Armin into a deep hug, finally finding some peace as he tells his son how much he loves him. Later, the scene shifts back to the royal palace. The king has received the update and tells Lyle he did a great job with the mission. Lyle remains humble about his success, so the king tells him that a formal reward will be sent to him by a messenger in the coming days. Lyle acknowledges the plan. With his work for the royal family finished for now, Lyle bows respectfully and exits the room. The king reflects on the situation, mentioning how crazy it is that he was helped by Rond in the past and is now being helped by his grandson too. Lyle looks up, caught off guard by the revelation. The king goes on to explain that Rond once helped him mend his family bonds as well. Lyle admits that he had no idea about that part of his grandfather's history. The king looks at him warmly and confirms that what he said is true. The king then brings up a specific name, Shatsu Disguise. He asks Lyle how his father is doing these days. Lyle's expression goes serious for a moment as he processes the question about his dad. Lyle clenches his hand for a second but quickly composes himself, giving a short, polite answer that he's doing fine. With a smile, Lyle tells the king that his father hasn't changed one bit. Moving on, 2 weeks pass since that meeting at the palace. Summer is officially hitting the Urda Kingdom and the heat is starting to get intense. Back at the shop, Asha is completely defeated by the weather. She's slumped over the desk, sweating and complaining about how hot it is. Someone nearby sees her looking like a puddle and jokes about how she has impressively melted. Lena watches Asha struggle with the summer heat and remarks that being a human seems like a pretty difficult ordeal. Lyle looks over at her and asks if she's doing all right herself, but Lena tells him not to worry. Since her body is purely mechanical, the temperature doesn't actually affect her like it does everyone else. Lyle admits he was a little worried she might malfunction or overheat, but seeing her now, he's relieved she's holding up. He figures it makes sense given that Luzhen was the one who built her. Lena then remembers something and mentions that it reminded her of a specific topic. She tells Lyle that Luzhen mentioned he wanted to head out to visit the family grave soon. Lyle takes a second to process that and realizes the season for those visits has already arrived. In the Urda Kingdom, it's a long-standing tradition for families to gather at the start of summer. People use this time to visit graveyards and pay their respects to those who passed away. The belief since ancient times is that ancestors actually return to their resting places during this specific season. Lyle thinks about it and says he should probably head out to visit his grandfather's grave soon as well. As he thinks about family, Lyle flashes back to his conversation with the king at the palace. He remembers the king bringing up the name Shatsu Disguise and asking about his father, which clearly still weighs on his mind. Lyle ends up staring into space for a moment, looking pretty out of it. Lena notices his distant expression and asks if everything is okay, even offering to go grab him a cold drink to help him snap out of it. Lyle quickly tells her he's fine, but just then, the shop door rings. Asha is still half melted on the counter, but she manages to squeeze out a weak welcome to whoever just walked in. A new visitor steps into the shop, calling out to see if there's anyone available to help them. The two new visitors step into the shop. The elderly man, Tyke, asks if this is the repairer's shop that everyone has been talking about lately. Once they sit down to talk, Lyle repeats their request back to them, clarifying if they actually want him to repair a grave. The man looks serious and confirms that's exactly why they're there, while his wife gives a polite, gentle look. Tyke explains that they look after a cemetery located just outside the royal capital, essentially working as the local gravekeepers. He mentions that while the cemetery gets busy with people cleaning graves this time of year, there's been a spike in graves for adventurers. Most of these belong to people who don't have any family left, and those headstones are starting to fall apart. The woman adds that they want to make sure everyone can rest in peace equally, regardless of whether they have family or not. Tyke clutches his arm and admits that their age is finally catching up with them, making it hard to handle the manual labor themselves. Lyle listens and thinks back to his own days as an adventurer. He remembers meeting so many people who were completely alone and just trying to make enough money to survive one day at a time. Lyle says he understands now why Tyke is coming to him with this job. Tyke looks a little sheepish and admits it's kind of embarrassing to have to ask for help like this. Lyle takes a moment to process everything, realizing the heart of the request is simply about showing respect and mourning for those who have nobody else. Lyle hears out the couple's request and agrees to help. Tyke says he understands the situation, and Lyle tells them they can count on him to handle the repairs. Moving on, a few days pass before Lyle heads out to the site. He arrives at the large iron gates that lead into the cemetery. Lyle steps inside and sees the massive amount of work ahead of him. Looking at all the crumbling headstones, he notes that there are way more than he expected. He realizes this job is going to be a big one, and figures he needs to settle in for at least 2 weeks of work.